Want to drive faster? Listen in as Kinch Rendell, an SCCA National Trophy winner and multi-time Pro Solo champion himself, interviews the best autocrossers in the land. He talks fast and drives even faster. And now here's your host, Kinch Rendell.
Today's guest has their own Wikipedia page mentioning their racing history, among other things. They are a Pro Solo national champion, multi-time, 5 or 6 times for national championships as well. 3 overall Pro Solo wins. I'm letting this drag out a little bit. Who do you think it could be? Some more clues. Front wheel drive, left foot breaker. I can relate. He is pretty famous in the sport. Has designed some national courses. What else? Was a drummer.
What I like to say to people is autocross is damage control. There is no perfect run. I know a lot of guys say, I had the perfect run there. They have bullshit.
There is lots to this. Almost 3 hours worth made it into the final cut here. I think you're going to get some more good insights out of this. I definitely did.
The rudiments of solo, all the elements are variations on like a straight line-ish slalom, a series of offsets, sweepers in a number of configurations, and 90-degree turns, and practicing those elements independently can let you really focus on them and not the interconnect.
This is Andy Hollis, the Andy Hollis, the man who has won and won. Listen in and let us know what you think. Andy, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Kinch. I've always enjoyed listening to these podcasts lately. We do a lot of tows across the country, and it always breaks up the time, and it's fun to hear the stories from other folks about the good old days or the new folks with kind of the new days and hear what their perspectives are on the sport. And you're doing a great job with it, so thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for the time. So, back to the good old days. When did those start for you?
My first recollection of cars in general, my dad was a sports car guy. He had Triumphs. And he had a TR3A, and my first memory of cars is sitting on the packet shelf in the back. In fact, one time I distinctly remember hiding under the tonneau cover when he went for a spirited drive through the country roads, and then suddenly I revealed myself to his surprise behind that. And then later on, he got a TR4, and I actually have a fun little picture of stacking a drum set. I used to play drums in a local band, and stacking my drum set inside of a TR4, if you can imagine that, with the top down and all like that, and it actually fit. So those were sort of my influences on cars. But my very first car was a 65 Mustang notchback automatic, red in color, that my parents had gotten me at a local used car lot when I graduated from high school. And basically it was so that I would stop borrowing their cars and stuff. And I had a summer job as a lifeguard, and I was cutting lawns and things like that. And then playing in a band, as I said, for additional income and for gas money and all. And so that was, they got me that. And the interesting story there was when we went to the used car lot, you kind of had a budget. I forget exactly what it was. I think we paid $500 for this car. And they also had a black fastback with a V8 in it and a manual shift and all. And I chose, horrifyingly, the automatic 6-cylinder notchback. But because of that, it set me on the course of learning to work on cars, because that car, while it came from a used car lot, it was a very unscrupulous used car lot, and as it turns out, it had a number of issues. So the very first time I changed the oil on it, it started burning oil madly, and I found out that basically it was just the engine basically completely needed a rebuild. So over the next 2 years, I ended up doing an engine swap on it, put a V8 in it, upgraded the wheels and tires and stuff from little 13-inch hubcaps to the larger 5 bolts and 9-inch rear and all these other kinds of things. And so it taught me all about that. Taught me all about pick and pulls and that kind of thing.
You said that car taught you about, and I missed what you said right there.
My first car taught me all about working on cars because when I bought it, it had an inherent problem, which was that it was burning oil like crazy. And so I went through a variety of the STP oil treatments and things like that, trying to find something that would keep it from doing that. And eventually I just threw up my hands and went and got a V8 from a 289 from a junkyard. And my brother and I put that in the car. And then, of course, once you beef up now the car sits down too low, so you have to change the springs. So I went for some uprated springs on the car, and then you need to go from the 4 to the 5 bolt wheels to get the right brakes on the car and stuff. And I had a 9-inch rear on it to support the power, and just little by little. And this was, again, I had no money. I mean, I was, high school and then, into college, poor college kid. And so I learned all about getting stuff out of junkyards. And
was this the red car? That. This is the red Mustang on
This
Facebook?
was the red car, yeah. This is the red 65 notchback. And, and another point on that, so I became a Ford guy, right? And that's because my brother was a Chevy guy. And my brother and I, competed in everything, sibling rivalry and stuff. And even though he helped me learn about how to work on the cars, he was completely a Chevy guy. And he was into drag racing and street racing, illegal street racing at night, which meant I had to be a guy into handling and stuff like that. And so very much directed, just doing the polar opposite of what he was doing to find my own little niche in it. But learned a lot with that car. And it kind of set me on the path for some of the other cool cars that I've had since then.
Yeah, I like that you have all these photos on Facebook. You sent me that earlier. I see the car, like everything's out of it. You weren't kidding. You started redoing all of the car, basically.
Yeah, well, the picture you're seeing there of the car disassembled was at the end of its 10-year lifespan, we finally parted it out after it just kind of. Actually, that's another funny story. It rolled down a hill and ran into a tree on its own when I forgot to set the parking brake one time. And this was on our very first house was up on top of a hill, and a neighbor came to the door and knocked on it and said, "Your car's in my front yard." And this was not my only car at that time. This was we used to have about 4 or 5 cars at a time, my wife and I, and so that we'd have 2 that were running at any point in time. This one, once it ran into that tree, that was the end of it. So we parted it out, and the guy who came to pick it up from the local we buy junk cars thing, he thought I told him it was a 65 Mustang. He was all excited. Now when he got to see it, there was nothing left of it other than the basic body. We stripped every single thing out of it and went to a local little car flea market, and sold all the parts at that point.
So when you're working this car, were you racing at all? What was there to do with the cars?
Well, at that point, that was my daily transportation, and so Ann and I we met in high school sweethearts, and so that car went on lots of trips. This is back when I lived in Baltimore, so it went trips to the beach in Ocean City, Maryland, Ocean City, New Jersey, trips along Skyline Drive and the Shenandoahs mountains and things, and just driving around. A lot of what we called the submarine races out at Loch Raven Reservoir, which was her and I hanging out and whatever. And then, but that was before autocross. Autocross came a little bit later, and we can get into that as you want.
That's just interesting. So you were already tinkering, and it sounds like the competitiveness with your brother was part of that. You had somebody around with you to help you do that. Your dad was into cars, but there was no racing yet. You were just working on cars to have a daily driver and to have something cool or cooler.
Exactly that. And in Maryland, we get since my brother's car was a single car garage, and my brother, he had a variety of Pontiac GTOs, a Chevelle, and various other Buick GS at one point. But the Chevelle was his biggie, and that was always in the garage, and so I only got the driveway outside. So I was always working on the car outside, and in the dead of winter with snow all around the ground, your starter goes out or your battery goes dead or whatever the issue. I was working on the car in those situations. In fact, I still own We had a big kerosene blower heater, one of those torpedo style things. I still own that thing because I'd be laying on the ground with snow all around, working under the car to repair it, just so I could go to the next band job or get to the wherever I was going, school, because I was commuting down to college at Johns Hopkins. So yeah, the car had to be running, and that's just what you did.
So that's how you learned to work on them. So when did you first see an autocross or learn about them?
So the story there is, so I had this 65 Mustang, and then of course being a Ford guy and a Mustang guy, at the time I was lusting, of course, after Shelby Mustangs, and so totally into the whole Shelby thing. And I still don't remember how I came across the car when I was living in Baltimore, but there was a used car dealer up in Pennsylvania just across the line that we had driven by, I believe, on just a drive. We went in the country, and I saw a 66 Shelby in there, and went and looked at it and all, and I was lusting after this car, and he wanted $5,000 for the car, and I actually had the income stream in order to afford to own the thing, and even pay on car payments, but nobody would give you a car loan on a used car, a 66 car, for $5,000 in those days. And so what I did was I had about $500 in cash, and then I went to 3 different banks, and what they had in those days was things called signature loans, where basically the loan officer would look at you and you tell them what your income stream is and all. You basically just signed for the loan. There was no collateral, nothing like that. And of course, with no internet and no communication between banks, the maximum they would give you is $1,500. And so I actually went to 3 different banks and raised $4,500 that way, and took my other $500 and went up there and bought that car and brought it home, and that became, so now I had 2 cars, 2 Mustangs, and that car also needed a few things worked on it, but it was actually in better shape overall than the 65. So we started going to local Shelby Club meets. And basically a Shelby Club meet is pretty much a car show. Guys would get together and show off their cars and stuff. And we did those, every month or two we'd go in the summertime to one of these Shelby meets. Most of them were up in Pennsylvania, but a variety of places. And we kind of got bored with that after a while, because it was, you go to the show and you put your car and you clean it all up and you set it there, and an exciting thing at the show would be, it's a month later from the last show, and so, hey, look, Fred got a new chrome valve cover or something like that, or somebody found some more emblems for their car. Because again, this is all way before the internet and all. So each of these shows would have a swap meet associated with it. So anyway, we did the car show kind of thing for a while, and we're kind of getting bored. And one of my buddies from the Shelby Club, who also lived in Baltimore, he heard about this thing called autocross. He's like, hey, let's go take our cars down there and show them off. These guys and they're car guys. Maybe they'll think it's cool. So we go to this autocross, and it's in a mall parking lot. This was in the days of the blue laws, where shopping wasn't allowed on Sundays. And so we go down there, and as it turns out, there's a guy there with what appeared to be a 65 Mustang or Shelby, and it turns out it was actually a fake. But so of course, as we all do now, when somebody new comes to the thing, you're like, oh, you got to run the car, you got to run the car, you got to run the car. And so we paid the entry fee, which I think was like $5. And halfway around the very first run in that car, I was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do with my cars for the rest of my life. This is so cool. This is so fun. And I never went to another car show after that. That was it. And it was because of the Shelby. And my buddy did a few autocrosses, but he didn't get bit as hard as I did. I ran, that was in a springtime of 78. And I ran every single event in the Baltimore area that year. And actually, surprisingly, I won the season championship, but not because I was really any good. I wasn't really all that great, but it was total points. And so I got the total points just based on participation. But that's how it started. It was love at first sight with the sport.
And do you remember, like, for me, I remember going and being 10 seconds slower than other cars. And that was part of the amazement, like, wait, how can a Miata beat me by 10 seconds? Any of that, or you were just shaking and hooked from the feelings, the experience? What do you recall from there?
It was the latter. It was the experience. I wasn't even worried about times. It was totally just the whole thing. And still to this day, I will tell people that I like nothing better than a big piece of pavement, a stack of cones, and a cool car. I don't even need a stopwatch because you do this in long enough, and you know when it's a good run and when there's more and all like that. Particularly if you come off with your hand shaking and stuff like that. I just love the visceral feeling that you get, of a car at the edge, the high rate of inputs that solo autocross requires. I just love that feeling, and that's what it came from. I actually it's funny, I have the results from every event from that year up in a box in the attic, and I need to go back and revisit that again because I've done it periodically, and I look at the names that are on there, and there's actually some familiar names. Guys I didn't know who the hell they were at the time. People like Dean Sapp and stuff like that had actually run at that same event. So it's kind of fun.
That's neat. Something to add to your Facebook page. I'll link the Facebook page with these photos there. That'd be pretty cool to see that. So that was, you were in a rear-wheel drive car to begin with, and it was a Mustang Shelby.
Yep.
Then what happens? What's after that?
So that was my autocross car for a while. I still had the 65, and sometimes when the 66 was broken, I'd bring out the Mustang, and it actually, once I got the Shelby, I started putting more and more Shelby parts onto the Mustang, as a lot of the guys would do in the days. There was also a lot of the parts on that car from J.C. Whitney, if any of the old guys remember that stuff. And so there's chrome mirrors from J.C. Whitney and little stripe on the bottom from J.C. Whitney and Krager mags and all those kind of parts from the day. But the 66 then, as I would go and get around to those shows and stuff, another car that had piqued my interest, well, obviously was Cobras, love Cobras and could never afford one of those. But I was starting to get infatuated with the Sunbeam Tiger as kind of the poor man's Cobra. And there was a guy in the area who had one that was set up for what's effectively in SCCA, it's Be Prepared, but yet still a street drivable Be Prepared car. So it had a roll hoop on it, and that was it. But it had a built motor and ran on. He has separate set of slicks for it and stuff that you could bolt on. Had ridiculous suspension on it, and car was stupid fun. Anyway, he was selling the car, and I bought that car. I think I paid $2,000 for it, and Ann daily drove that thing. She was a nurse, and she daily drove it to work and scared the bejesus out of a lot of her co-drivers when they would go to lunch, and she would be fishtailing the thing around the street. But she was not autocrossing at this point, by the way. So this was just me running the Shelby. And so then I got that Sunbeam Tiger, and I started running around there, and it was a contender for fastest time of the day all the time and stuff. But it was... I was learning a lot of bad habits, let's just put it that way. The car was stupid fun. I was going really, really fast, but the lot of bad habits because big power, big stick. You learn the wrong things really quickly.
I've heard that several times. That's probably why I'm still in a Civic, huh?
There you go.
So you're you're serious in that you're putting a lot of time into it and you're getting competitive. At some point here, you're going to switch to front wheel drive. How does this occur?
Right. So I had the Tiger, and in fact, one more cool car happened along that way. Actually, two more. I found a deal in the local paper, and again, there was no internet. You found cars in the local paper or at used car lots. And I was big into big in the Shelby Club at the time, and I actually went out to the national convention that they had up in Dearborn and things. And then I found locally I found a GT500, a 67 GT500 with the inboard auxiliary headlights and that whole deal for $2,000, which was a steal even then. And so I bought that car too. And Ann then started rotating between that car and the Sunbeam Tiger. And then, and again, this was over the course of, it was 78 through 84, so there's a good 6-year period in there where I was accumulating these Shelby American related products, And then finally, kind of the pièce de résistance was when I was on a business trip. I was back in the computer games business, and I was at the Consumer Electronics Show up in Chicago. And the other car, of course, that everyone lusted after was the Di Tommaso Pantera. And I'd always loved those cars. And I was at this trade show, and I was looking through the paper up in Chicago, and some guy was selling one. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to get a joyride today. I'm going to go drive this guy's car. And so I call the guy up, and I make up this story and blah, blah. And I come out, and I look at the car over, and I go for a test drive in a Pantera. It was like the most awesome day in the world at that time. And I come back and it's like, I can't afford, or I'm sorry, you're asking too much. The market's blah, blah and stuff. And I told him, though, I said, hey, I think he was asking in the mid-20s or something. And I offered him $16,000, which was kind of an insult. But I was like, hey, if just let me know, I can get on an airplane, come up and get it. Dude calls me back about 4 weeks later, got no other offers at all, and sold it to me. So I flew up there and bought the Pantera and brought it back. And so at that point, we had sold the GT500 to buy a down payment for the first house, but we had the Pantera, the Tiger, and the Shelby 66 all there in our very first house in a single-car garage. And so there's a Pantera and a Shelby sitting out in the driveway and a Sunbeam Tiger in the garage. So that was sort of the end of the cool cars.
What is Ann thinking this whole time? Is she like okay with this?
Yeah.
Is she bugging you about this? Is she's like, why are you spending so much time with these cars?
Oh no, this is not okay. There actually was another car, which was her car that her parents had given her, which was an old bottle Coke shaped Dodge Charger with a 318 motor in it and all like that. And that was her daily. And of course, it had some issues too, and I had to work on that. And by now, I mean, we're married and all and stuff. And we actually got married right after I graduated from college, which was 78, and she graduated from nursing school. And no, she was not happy with this at all. As you can imagine, like I said, we own typically 5 cars at a time. Only 2 are ever running, hopefully, completely. And she finally got fed up with it. We had our first daughter, Becky, and she's like, look, I need to be able to be sure I can get to work and all this kind of stuff. And so we finally got our first brand new car. We could afford it at the time. We were both working, getting reasonable money. And so we bought for her daily, a 1984 Volkswagen GTI, which were fabulous cars. We got on the whole hot hatch train at the time. And I started autocrossing that car. And prior to this, I was okay locally, but I wasn't great or anything. Suddenly I started winning. And to put that into perspective, autocross in those days in the mid-Atlantic area was cutthroat. I mean, it was cutthroat. It was in both Baltimore and D.C., there was a council of sports car clubs with anywhere from 6 to 10 clubs, each of which would put on 1 or 2 events on the schedule each year. And each club, nobody would help each other. Now, maybe if you were a member of a club, some of those guys might help you, but usually they were not driving the same kind of car you were, unless like you were a Corvette guy and you were in the Corvette club, but I wasn't. I was a member of a general autocross club called Autocrossers Inc., and then there was another one in D.C. called Autocrossers Limited. And so, and there was no internet, no nothing for teaching you anything. So I learned things very slowly, the hard way. A lot of hard lessons there. And then I got this GTI, all of a sudden I'm winning. One, because it's a car that, is functioning as it was designed, where these other ones were old used cars. And 2, it had, brand new Pirelli P6s on it from the factory with wide wheels and a good suspension from the factory. And 3, as it would turn out, this was in D stock at the time. It was the car to have. And I didn't know that. I just happened to have bought one. And so started winning with that locally. I went up to a divisional up in Harrisburg. Did really well there. It was kind of like, wow, okay. There's something to this.
And what is Ann thinking? Like, did she want that car? Or did you say, honey, this is the one you should get? What was the thought there? And then you start racing it.
Right. So I don't remember specifically that. She was very happy with it. When we got it, I'm sure we test drove it together and all like that. And I'm sure I was smart enough to be looking for something sporty that we could use for autocross, or that I could use for autocross, not her. But she loved that car. I mean, it would go through snow and ice, because we had, we didn't get a lot of snow in Baltimore. We got a lot of ice and kind of slushy, crappy sort of weather in the wintertime. And that car was great through that. It was fabulous during the summertime. In fact, she liked it so much she convinced her older brother to buy one too. Yeah, it was great.
Are you taking her with you on trips or no? Are you taking her car and racing it and then bringing it back?
She would come some at that point. She was interested in cars. As I mentioned earlier with the Tigers, she would terrorize. I mean, she was always a lead foot on the street, but she was so timid that she would not, I could not convince her, to run at the events at all. And that, back in even in 84, and even though it was her car, she would not. 85, though, was the turning point for me because I started running more and more. So we would go all the way up to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where they had the farm show lot. It was a massive lot up there. We would go down to D.C. quite a bit, as well as all the events in Baltimore. So I started adding a lot of weekends to my schedule. So she hung out with me for that and was good. And we had the both girls by 85 had been born. That's when our second was born in 85. And so they would come with us, and the thing was kind of like a clown car. We would pack all this stuff in there so the kids could be in their playpen during the day at the event and stuff like that. So it became a bit of a family outing. And then I'm trying to remember the specifics. So 85, I think, was the beginning of like putting R comps on the car. That's when the Yokohamas came out. I think it was 86 when Ann actually finally started autocrossing. And the way it happened was we went up to Harrisburg, where not as many people knew us. And what they would do up there, actually, all of the autocrossing in those days, you didn't have to be there all day. It was always put on by one club, and that club provided all the workers all day long. So you signed up for a heat, which you either did by phoning up ahead of time to pre-register, or you got to the event and signed up at the beginning of the day and picked a heat you wanted to run in. You had a number on your car that reflected the heat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then your actual car number. And some of the clubs would have fun runs later on at the end of the thing. And so we had gone up to Harrisburg, and I convinced her to run later on during the fun runs section. And she did. Nobody knew who she was at that point and all like that. And I still have a picture from that. That happens on the Facebook page too. And she was a natural. She was a total natural. I mean, she's looking ahead, and this picture shows her looking out the side window and stuff going around the turns. She was total natural. She loved it, got over the whole nervousness thing very quickly. And then from then on, it was, the rest of it's kind of history from there. But yeah, she was a natural. And this was very end of 86 at that point. The GTI was pretty well developed. I had gotten what was that book, How to Make Your Car Handle by Fred Pune, whatever it is. And I had figured out how to make little toe plates and a trammel bar and how to do camber and stuff like that on those cars, change front sway bar, all the shocks and stuff I had done to it, for stock. And the car was good, and we were doing well, even at the divisional level at that point. And then things really exploded.
Yeah, right around then, it seems like Pro Solo. That's when you started getting to doing some different Pro Solos.
Yeah, exactly. So I went up to, and I don't remember the specific year. I think it was in 85. They had Pro Solo came through up at the Farm Show building. Because again, that was a huge site. They could easily do 2 courses on it. In fact, the divisionals we used to go up there, they would have, just like Nationals, have 2 courses running. You ran one day, the other day, and they were running simultaneously. And it was, the whole Nationals experience, except done on that particular site. But anyway, Pro Solo came into town, made a huge impact on me. It was, they had very few classes. Everybody who was there was a big name. And in those days, the only way you knew the names was from reading Sports Car magazine. People like Ron Fleer were there, Roger Johnson, E. Paul Dickinson. In fact, E. Paul Dickinson was hooked up with Brumos Porsche. So here I drive into the site, and there's all these 18-wheelers and transporters. And I go, OMG, this is like, big deal stuff here. And it made it, like I said, it made a huge impact on this being like pro racing, tire companies were there. I forgot. I think Goodyear, I think, was there. I think it was before. No, BFG was there too because they were hooked up with Roger. I didn't know these guys personally. I just walked around with my, mouth hanging open, looking at the cool cars. That's when Fleer had the Lotus and all, and I guess that was the Europa, and it was just amazing. And so I just watched for that one. But then the following year, I was like, you know what, I got to do this. I got to come up here and run. And so I did. I did reasonably well. That was, I had done well to divisional, and did reasonably well there. The other thing, the second time, when I actually competed, I got beat by this guy named Alan McConnell, and he was living in Alabama, with Jackson Racing prep on the car, out of California. And he was in a 86 Civic Si, and he was in 86, and I was still in the GTI, and he beat me. And of course I'm thinking, it's got to be the car, right? Can't be me. So I'm like, I got to get one of those. So that fall, we bought our first quote unquote dedicated autocross car. So Ann was still driving the GTI around, and we bought this Civic Si that I'd started daily driving that, because dailying the Pantera was kind of ridiculous. I did daily that for 2 years, and that was kind of ridiculous. And so started driving this Civic, and it was ordered with 0 options. We even intercepted it before they put the usual spray-on dealer installed undercoating, which was par for the course in Maryland, and so it's going to be as light as it could be. No radio, no AC. Even got the dealer installed Mugen CF48 turbine-looking wheels that were a half-inch wider on it. That for a period of time of about all of maybe 3 months, SCCA had said those were legal, and then they changed their mind on it. Took the car down to the first Pro Solo I ever ran with it was Sebring in, I guess that was 87. Went down there and promptly won. And it was, I beat Alan. I beat guys like Bob Smith and his MR2, a whole host of other folks. That's also where I met Chuck Noonan, hooked up with him at that point, who was like the man when it came to Hondas in autocross. And I learned a lot of things from Chuck, both good and bad, as it would turn out. His approach to things wasn't always the smartest, but yeah, 87, and that was a really big deal. So that year I ran a couple other pros. Ann went to nationals, and this was still during her first full year. She started the end of 86 and finished at 87, and she won nationals in her rookie year, D-Stock Ladies, against Dorothy Raymond, back when Peter and Dorothy were running an MR2. And that was a pretty darn big deal. It was something that we were running on Yokohamas at the time, but that's when we hooked up with BFG, who offered a tire contract to Ann, not me. I trophied. It was good. It was all good. I trophied. But it was it helped our game even more. And then in things just kind of, that just started us down that whole Honda route.
Yeah, no kidding. So you buy it, you win. So then you're probably for sure saying it was the car. Back then, how many people were coming to Pro Solos? Like, how large were the classes, since there were less classes, and how many people overall?
Right. So I call those the glory years of Pro Solo, and there was kind of actually 2 glory year periods. In those days, in fact, originally, I guess it was T.C. Klein was in charge of Pro Solo. He was the guy that ran around, and I think they had I want to say it was like a Volkswagen-based motorhomey thing that they were running around as a timing vehicle and doing the Pro Solo thing. But there was very few classes, and what they had done basically was taken the SCCA classes and boiled it down into just a few. I want to say there was about 4 or 5 stock classes. The Street Prepared didn't even exist in SCCA at the time. And so the next step up was Prepared. And basically the Prepared mod cars all ran in one of, I think, 2 classes. Heads up, there was no indexing going on or anything like that. And there was no ladies classes, so Ann was running in the open class with me. And so competition was very, very focused in those days. The other thing that was different about it was that, again, no internet, no free or low-cost long-distance phone calls. So the only way you ever saw anybody in the sport from anywhere else around the country was at the Nationals. And here, Pro Solo comes along, and now there's this traveling series where you could now run against other people who were willing to travel and were typically good enough to where they felt that was justified. And so the competition was fierce in pretty much every class. It was just fierce. And it was also, again, it was more like pro racing is on a lot of levels these days, and at least at some of the lower level, pro road racing stuff, where there was big, money available as prize money. Valvoline was a series sponsor, and they put a bunch of money into the series, and so you could win just cash prizes for various placings, as well as contingency money was crazy in those days, as well as tire money. Contingency from tires and tire contracts were relatively plentiful for those who were doing well, so that they could do the old win on Sunday, sell on Monday kind of thing. So a lot of money running around to give you incentive and also to be able to afford traveling around the country. So we started traveling a lot. Once we got the BFG tire contract, 1, we could afford the tires we were burning up, and 2, we could afford the travel expenses with winnings from Pro Solo. And so that really fueled our program. It was all based around Pro Solo, in those days for us. And I've always loved that format, the adrenaline, the build-up, the suspense, of what it entails. And if all autocross was Pro Solo, I'd be perfectly happy with it. That would be great. I don't need the big huge courses. I mean, it's a different sort of thing, and it's fun. The regular autocross, but really fell in love with Pro Solo in those days.
And back then, did they always have a challenge round? Was that always part of it?
Yes, Pro Solo, the challenge was always the thing. And in fact, if you read the preamble in the Pro Solo rulebook, it talks about that as always being the thing, the focus of the weekend. Everything builds up to that, which is why, they always had the concept of class winners being bracketed against each other and declaring an overall winner. That was one of the hallmarks of Pro Solo. And in fact, it's the reason why there's 2 courses, is to facilitate having head-to-head bracketed competition. I think, back in the early days, they always thought that, TV might be an end result of things, but that never really materialized. They had a couple of tries at that, but it never really materialized. So, yeah, that was it. And in fact, that begat, which is a whole nother conversation, all of the indexing and how that works and stuff. Because back in those earliest days, the way it worked was whatever your class winning time differential was, is what the head start on the tree for the challenge round was. So, if some guy's running a class and he wins his class, at a 42.1, and you win your class at a 40.1, then he got a 2-second head start, on the tree per side. And so therefore the whole concept of sandbagging all started off back in those days, and it was everybody did it, and that's just the way it worked. But then they tried various ways of getting rid of that, and that's a whole nother conversation for another time. I'm actually writing an article for Grassroots about that and some of the history there and some of the techniques and the things, not just about sandbagging, but just how to do well in super challenges and stuff, having been through that a lot.
Yeah, no kidding, a lot. And I can tell you guys, since he's won 3 overall, that's something I'd love to have a feather in the cap of winning 1 for the year end. Just going through the challenges is like nothing else. Like, I don't know how often luck is needed, but I feel like every time I watch a challenge rounds, the whole thing, something odd is always happening to somebody for whoever's going to win. Take us through some of the ones that you've won. Let's not say season overall, but just some of the in-event overall wins you've had.
So my very first was in Atlanta a number of years ago, and then there was a big lull for a while. For me, my thing, I fell victim in those days to the same thing that a lot of people fall victim to, which is, one, they think of it as icing on the cake, so it's never a goal for them. And 2, they come up against certain people that just have this aura about them, that you can't ever win against. And my guy was Roger Johnson, Roger Ohio Johnson, the Corvette guy. And for some reason, I always ended up drawing Roger in the challenge rounds, and he would soundly beat me. And I would usually, because I would do something stupid, he would take advantage of it. And he was like a machine out there. And it wasn't until one year, a number of years later, where I finally got over that and I beat him, and then he never beat me ever again. And then it was kind of the opposite. He would get me a fair bit, but yeah, the very first one, I want to say it was a mix of things. It was at Atlanta. It was a downhill start. I remember all those things about it, and I just worked my way through the field at that point. But it wasn't until a number of years later where I really started being strategic about the way that I approached the Super Challenge, and developed some ideas, some techniques, some approaches that really helped me out with that.
I've seen your focus sitting there. I'm not sure if you're looking or you're just thinking, but take us through some of this. Once you're to the challenge round, I think I've also seen you walk in the courses, which I've done in between, from class competition to now it's going to be a challenge round. What are you doing? Are you relaxing? Are you getting pumped? Are you going over a game plan?
So I do a lot of things. What you see me doing there, which was just kind of funny. So I never see anybody walking the course, before and during the lunch break before the challenge rounds, and as if the course doesn't change. Well, of course the course changes. Where the rubber and the buildup is and stuff has moved around. What I find over the 3 sessions throughout the weekend into the challenge round is that the lines you can run get tighter and tighter. You can shave more and more distance off the course throughout the weekend as the rubber builds up. There's always more stick on Sunday afternoon, usually than any other time in the whole weekend, which also causes people to red light because they don't take that into consideration. They start doing their launches the exact same way they always do, and guess what? They red light in the first round. So I'm out there looking at the rubber buildup. I'm also just kind of getting my head together, sort of being one with the course and that sort of thing. But the other homework I do is I look at who I'm paired up with. I look at what their tendencies are. Is this a guy that tends to hit cones? Is this a guy who doesn't hit cones? Was he a guy who was in second place, third place? What was the margin? Did he have a really fast scratch time but hit cones, and he would have won? You need to know that kind of stuff as to how you're going to approach that first run. And the first round is where all the weird shit happens. People have cold tires, their brains are cold. There's just all kinds of weird stuff that goes on there. So you need to not be the guy who loses it for yourself in the first round. You need to always be a little bit more conservative in the first round. You're not going to win the Super Challenge in the first round. Like I say, doing the homework on all those things and getting the car prepped. There's things, at least the cars I've run over the years, handle different on Sunday afternoon than they do on Sunday morning, particularly the front-wheel drive cars with cold rear tires on the very first run, there's things you can do with the shocks and stuff like that to make sure that the car is not a handful on the very first run, and then in the very first round. So again, so you don't lose it for yourself.
It makes total sense to even think about that. And I love what you said, that the first round all the weird stuff happens. I swear I've made every mistake possible to go out, and usually it probably is the first round. Is that how most of us learn, or is there some other path that some of us can take to avoid all that?
You know, obviously you learn things the hard way, but this stuff isn't rocket science. I've had these conversations with some people of late that were doing well, early in the season, that were interested in learning about these things. Dave Whitener, of course, a real good example of that. We share a lot of knowledge in things and procedures and processes and stuff. And he and his wife Kim have done extremely well in the challenges. Some of it was just stuff that Ann and I came up together, because once the ladies class stuff started happening in Pro Solo, and she was a part of the beginning of that. In fact, she was the very first ladies class champion, and even before they had a ladies challenge, and then they had a ladies challenge, and she always did well in those. And that was another reason why we were able to financially handle getting all the travel done, was because we were basically funding it off of the two of us doing reasonably well in the series. But things like some of the things were things that we just, other people were doing. It's like radios, for example. That's another one. Radios was par for the course. All the fast people had radios, two-way radios, that they were, getting information from the co-driver back in the pits, watching what the other driver on the other course was doing. So if the other guy hits a cone, that information. You can just back off a little bit, that kind of thing. It was really useful to know that. So we kind of figured a lot of that stuff out ourselves. Nobody was telling us that sort of thing.
And that reminds me that you guys have done lots of teaching. I came down there, probably in that Civic I bought from you. I think it was in Houston. I remember Ann even being there to teach. And something I want people to realize is, I think she was imparting on me every inch matters. And in this case, I forget which class it was, but I just pulled up to the line. Usually at any big event, I'm pulling up like as close as I can for the shortest distance for the launch or the straightest line. And I remember her getting on me about that. So that tells me that you guys are very particular about even the small things that I see so many people not even paying any attention to. Can you tell us some of those things? They don't have to be Pro Solo related, just some of your thought processes there.
Yeah, distance matters. Distance matters. It's rare that the shortest line isn't the best line. There are cases, and years later, after I started doing Evo Phase 3 schools, which I helped develop that program, which was course analysis and all like that. And I learned to, I've done a lot of course design too, and I learned what are the kind of maneuvers where you don't want to take the shortest distance. But shortest distance matters, and also the ability to get on the throttle, off the throttle at the right times, on it earlier, coming off turns. And yeah, the course starts right where you stage, and how you stage, and the direction you stage. What if you've got a front wheel drive car that has a little bit of torque steer? Guess what? You want to account for that so that you can launch the car the proper amount. And even a course that has a 90-degree turn right off the stage line before the lights, you still want to launch the car and be coming across that line the best. Where you're aimed in the direction you want to be at the maximum speed that you can carry through that particular part. All of that stuff matters. And so many people just kind of mosey off the line, or they go too crazy off the line. So you sort of have to work backwards from where the start line is. I do that a lot, like when I'm walking a nationals course, where there tend to be quite a bit of distance between the actual timing light and the start line. The other one that I learned about after a while was where the beam was, because you'll often find that the beam is not perpendicular to a gate where you're going to go through, like you see at most regional events. And that actually started years ago. Roger Johnson used to start doing that. Houston Johnson, in his courses, and it was out of necessity for the way timing systems worked. You had to be in the beam, breaking the beam for more than a minimum amount of time. Otherwise, it would not trip. and particularly in finishes where you'd be coming through upwards of 60, 70 miles an hour, if the beam was perpendicular to the course, it would not always register a trip. And so by angling the beam, you were in it for a longer period of time. Well, if the gates are wide enough, you start to learn, well, hey, if I just hug the inside here, I can actually trip the beam sooner. Even though I have to go a little bit slower around the exit of the turn, I'm accelerating. I'm not accelerating into anything. I'm just going through the finish light. Same thing at the start. At the start it is when you're going the slowest. So to the extent that you can position the car to where you actually go through the beam as quickly at the highest speed where you're positioned the correct way, that pays dividends farther down.
No kidding. And that slowest, I always think about that. Any place I'm going slow, I want to be extra tight if possible. Something you said, though, where tightness doesn't matter. What are some examples where distance doesn't matter on an autocross course?
Well, it's not that it doesn't matter. It's just that where taking the wider line actually can be better. Because most people just say, hey, tight lines are it. In fact, I still remember watching, John Ames was the guy who was just so good at that. I remember watching him one time at Nationals. There was this great, big, huge sweeper. And he was effectively driving almost cone to cone around the inside of it. Not just smoothly, but almost like turning around every single cone, just chopping little bits and turning it into like a semicircular octagon, if you will. You know what I mean? Where it's just the line segments. And I was like, wow, that is really, really smart. And it didn't, there was no reason to carry speed coming off and no reason to carry it, coming in. And he just chopped a bunch of distance, over a maneuver, an element that you were in for quite a bit of time. But I'll give you an example of a situation where the wider line's actually better. The course I did at Lincoln, I guess it was the what are we calling that now? The Plainside, the East course here a few years back. It had an element. You started off and you went up the hill and you went through a slalom, and then there was a big 180 onto a straightaway. I mean, literally a legitimate straightaway where you basically came all the way back towards the start and then made another turn and then went through the middle. And I remember because Hayward Wagner was giving the Evo talk that night on that course, and he told me ahead of time, here's what I'm going to tell her about it. Do you agree with that? And I said, I'm just not going to comment. And I think what he said, at least it wasn't my approach, and it certainly wasn't one I intended. He was telling people to take that 180 in a way where you could get back over to the right real quick so you could set up for the next turn way down the thing. But the next turn was so far away that no, you really wanted to unwind the wheel early, tight line in the middle of the turn and start unwinding early and roll power and then just kind of mosey on back to the right. And there's actually a video up on YouTube that I did. I actually won that year. And I did a little overdub where I typed in what was going through my head as I drove through that course, and you can watch that and see that. But yeah, that one was not about minimizing distance. It was actually about maximizing speed because it was a true track-oriented road race maneuver where getting on the power earlier made tons of difference in maximizing the straightaway there.
That's interesting. That's something I learned getting in the Civic on street tires. Was I used to just, okay, I'm not going to accelerate and go wider on exits. But after getting beat for a year or so there, I finally gave up and said, I'm going to keep this little engine pedaling. And actually, those are the only places kind of exiting things would I ever just keep the foot into it and dare accelerate through that. And then I want to come back to, you said John Ames was cutting off. When I rode with Adam Braun last year at Spring Nats on the test course, he did that. And it was a bizarre feeling how he cut down distance, but when I repeated that, the amount of time it dropped was amazing. So basically with that Corvette, he would point, shoot, like brake really hard to get it rotate, and just take what you would consider are sweepers, which I remember very clearly from your course, those big offsets going, I guess, south. He would just cut distance like no other. He would try to make it little straights, which sounds exactly like what you said John Ames was doing.
Yeah, the other example of that, and by the way, where I learned a lot of this, not just watching guys like John, was again those Evo Phase 3 courses that I developed. I would play around with those. Part of that was to teach people, like one of the things we had was we had this massive sweeper, and we'd have a series of offset gates on one side of it, and we'd have a slalom coming into it. And we would force people on a variety of lines by putting in some cones. We'd do some runs that way, record the times, and we were using MaxQData data loggers. And then we would change the line to like a tight line, and even like to such a tight line where you had to basically make the big 180 big sweeper as like a pair of 90s and stuff. And we put that same basic design all over the country. So Mineral Wells, which is a huge site up in Packwood, a few other places, Atwater, and by looking, we would then go over the data with the people and say, okay, if you took the wide line, here's what it does. And yeah, you're in the turn longer, but now you're carrying more speed coming out, and you can carry more speed deeper, farther in, brake later. And then we would do the tight lines and we'd see what it was. Depending on how that set of maneuvers, those three elements got set up, dictated which was faster. And it wasn't always one or the other. So at Mineral Wells, it was actually faster to take the wider line because it was a bigger site and those offsets were faster offsets. So what I was learning was what you were really trying to do was on any situation where you just don't want to be at max throttle and wish you had more. You know what I mean? And by the way, none of these things apply to AMOD because that's like different physics with aero and all that other kind of crap. But for most cars, you kind of went backwards from, well, what's my speed, in the maneuver coming out, and how long was it going to take me to get to that speed, and what, and then add the minimizing distance on top of that. And then it kind of made more sense. So I often talk about, when I both design courses and do analysis, it's not just the elements. And in fact, oftentimes the more important thing is the inflection points in between the elements. So yeah, there might be a slalom, and yeah, there might be a 90-degree turn somewhere just prior to it. But the inflection point between coming out of the one and turning into the other, that's really where the magic is. That's where you're making the speed changes. You have way more room to maneuver, either to get it right or wrong. That's really where the thing is.
Yeah, and let me see if, in other words, what I've heard a lot of people say on this podcast is they look at the exit of an element, but really depending on what you're going back into, in the example from the Evo schools, how those are arranged, if you can use speed coming out or not, probably is going to force you to choose or determines which line is going to be the fastest. Is that what you're getting at? It really depends on if you need the speed or can carry the speed, whether you're going to go wider or not wider at different times?
Yes, very much so. It's always the balance of speed versus distance. And I have some rules of thumb on that. So if it's a 90-degree turn or bigger, you're always doing kind of the classic track lines. You start outside, you dive in across the apex, then you track out. Anything from 90 degrees bigger, or less of a turn, then yes. Once it's 180 or more, it's almost always running right around the inside of it. Where you start out a little bit, but you go to the inside very quickly, ride the inside, stay right at the limit, and unwind early and roll out of it. It's in between the 90s and the 180s. That's where it's never clear. That's where you have to look at the speed of the exit, speed of what's coming into it, and what you want to do to minimize. Ultimately, the way you get through it quickest is maximum speed over the minimum distance, right? That's what it is. And so you have to figure out which one's more important. 9 times out of 10, distance is more important. And the way I usually figure that out is, and I think Whitener mentioned this, is in his podcast with you, is a lot of times I'll walk through a section and I'm like, I'm not really sure where I want to be right here, but I know where I want to be over there. So I'll go over there at the exit or wherever the next inflection point where I know I have to be right here on this cone pointed in that direction. And I'll walk my way backwards and see where it ends up putting me. And being careful that I'm not turning on a dime, as a lot of people do when they walk, but a nice radius, working my way back, and I go, okay, that means when I'm back here at this entry, I need to be here, and then I start thinking about speed and all like that. But it's go to the exit, and usually the exit is where you want to be right here. Sometimes it's not an exit. And I know a lot of the guys say it's all about the exits, and that may be the case, but I actually find there's some other times when it isn't so much the exit as here's a place I know I need to be right here. find those places around the course and then fill in the blanks from there.
Yeah, very good point. Where it's so new to me to think that's all about the exit, because I feel like, maybe just the way I drive my Civic, the entry and how I'm going to handle that and the braking zone to stay as tight as I want to stay seems very key. But like you guys have both done, I think that's so key to where do I want to end up at? How the heck would I get there? And one thing I've always tell people is like, what angle is my car at as I go by these different cones that I'm keying on? As like your car's either turned or it's not turned, or whatever degree angles it is off or on. I guess that's for late apex or early apex. That's how I want to figure out how to get to that point you guys are talking about, by looking back and saying what angle really gets us there, and can we realistically walk that line to get there?
Exactly.
Now, I've seen you run courses. I've jogged and run a few courses. When I'm doing that, I really think I can feel better how tight a turn is. Do you have any of that, or are you just getting exercise?
Both.
Yeah, good.
It's kind of my morning ritual. Have a cup of coffee and go out for a run. And with Pro Solo, it's a great way of just kind of getting a feel for things. In fact, usually what I'll do is, this is back when I was running more. I'm not running so much anymore, but I would actually go out and run a couple of miles somewhere around the site or something like that, and then work my way back to the course area. And back when I was super serious about it, I would literally run what I call a Pro Solo set. So I'd go around, I'd go to whichever side I was going to start first on that day, and I'd start I'd just roll right through the line, run through the course, switch sides, run through the other course, switch sides, run through that course, switch sides, run through that course. And that was the end. And I would be visualizing, as I'm going through that, building up the mental image and stuff like that. And I'm big on visualization. It was just kind of really focusing, getting the head around all that stuff, as well as getting exercise too.
Yeah, a double winner. So visualizing, are you memorizing a course? Are you memorizing all of it, part of it?
So that has changed for me over time. What I used to do and what I did kind of in the middle years, and then what I do now. Getting older, it's increasingly important, yet I'm increasingly failing at doing it, but that's a whole nother topic. But in my really focused years, absolutely, visualize and my method, and I think this is on, there's a thing that Kate Hughes did a number of years ago, Autocross Handbook for Novices, and it's still up on the internet, and I talk about how I do it there. What I like to do is, first I'll do a social walk just to see people and kind of get a general feel, where's the course go, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll get away from people completely. And I will walk through a section, stop, not in the middle of the course, like walk off to the side, because I hate it when people stop in the middle of the course. Walk off to the side, close my eyes, look at the ground, and go through it in my head. And then I will go back onto the course, and I'll add another segment, step off the course, and go back to the beginning in my head, and visualize through there what the course is and kind of where I want to be. Step back on the course, do it again. And by the time you get to the end of the course, you should be able to step off the side of the course and go through it all in your head. I'm one of those guys, by the way. I mean, I know it's big in Colorado. I remember seeing Klingler and Barry Ott and those guys doing the LSD experience at the end of the course. They're kind of floating around with their hands moving around. You kind of do the thing with your hand and you move it around. And I do the same thing. I'm trying to be I've always tried to not be as obvious about it, but that's what's going on in my head. I'm basically visualizing, and you're sort of, you got your hands out in front of you, you're sort of turning the wheel and stuff like that. And in fact, if you're doing it right, you hear vroom vroom noises in your head. When I can really do that right, that's when I know I've got the course in my head.
And let's say, how many so you walk the first one general, and then you come through and walk each section, making sure you can, in your mind, get to that section. Does it take you one walk, or did it ever take you one walk to do that, or that second walk one time through? Can you have it memorized, or were you doing 2 or 3 to get that done?
Oh, I used to get it in one. I would nail it in one, but I can't do that anymore. But no, I used to do it in one. I would do more. Then what I would do is that would give me the whole thing in my head. And then I would I'd go back and start looking for subtle things. And usually I would walk it, 2 or 3 times, and it was really in my head. Particularly at Pro Solo, what I would then do is, of course, you ran the morning session, which used to be, by the way, it used to be practice. Saturday morning was practice. And there was no Friday thing at all. And so it didn't even count. And then I might go back and walk it again based upon what I saw and felt and all, and go, something was weird here, and kind of go and look at it. Or I might watch some other people do something and alter my plan. I always had a plan in my head as to how I was going to attack it. But yeah, that's it didn't take me a whole lot. Now it takes me a lot more. And I can't even remember I used to know where every damn cone was, and driving along and I could see a cone. I would visually see a cone that was 2 inches slightly out of the box, and I would see that and make a mental note of it as I'm driving. I don't see things that way anymore. I'm almost 60 years old now, and so stuff doesn't work like that anymore.
I wish I only made mental notes of those cones. I usually yell and start pointing, and people are probably like, what is his problem? He's probably pissed. But it's all about the cones, guys. So if you see me yelling and pointing, it's because the cone's not exactly in its little perfect box. Oh, one thing I want to review for people. So I very well know, and I've copied this, walk the course a little bit, and then act like I'm driving through my car or using my hands to see the arcs. What I do is, instead of trying to, let's say, replay it visually all the time, I will stop at a section and somewhat visually, but actually look at the course and say, how did I get here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turns in the slalom, this. So I will walk the sections like Andy's saying, but then sometimes I'll look back and say, which key cones am I looking at as I go through this, to make sure I know where I'm going, as well as to physically see it. So it's not exactly visualizing, but it's truly like, do I know how to get here? And look at the exact cones that we're going to drive around is kind of my little tweak on exactly what they're doing.
Right. So to that point, when I talk about visualizing and also having a plan of attack, that's the planning part. The execution part, all of that is based upon situational awareness, which is what most people call looking ahead. And situational awareness is the execution on top of the plan. And so part of my visualization is picking out those key cones. Where am I going to look? When I'm here, where am I looking? When I'm there, where am I looking? When I'm here, where am I looking? And the execution part is all based on situational awareness, that information coming into your brain acts on that information, because your brain is a really great supercomputer. It can do closure rates. If you see something, you glance at something and then glance away, it puts that in your spatial awareness profile, and it can even track you through movement through that 3D space. Your brain can do all that sort of thing, but you have to see it first in order to stick it into your head. So, for example, and this is one of the things we used to teach in Evo all the time, was you got a great big huge 180 turn. You may not be able to look all the way across it the whole time, but if you just glance over there one time and then glance back, now your brain knows the radius of that turn, and it kind of then knows, when I turn the wheel to turn into this thing, about how far do I need to go. And so that's, for me, is the way you execute on the plan is via the getting information. And I don't just look strictly at individual cones. I'm always scanning. And the reason for that is your eye, the center of your eye, is not as good as what's around it. So you really want to be moving your eyes around in order to get that spatial awareness and closure rates and stuff like that. So I'll be scanning up to the next thing, and then I might look back a little bit in order to get more information into the brain, and it makes it actually work better.
Have you found yourself approaching a cone and making a last-second input to avoid hitting it because you're scanning so much?
Yes.
Okay.
But here's the thing. It's not that I'm scanning too much. It's... Okay, I'll back up to another...
I just happen to know I do that, and people are like, why are you looking when you're so close? I'm like, because I don't want to hit the cone.
Well, so here, let me comment on that. So what I like to say to people is autocross is damage control. There is no perfect run. I know a lot of guys say, I had the perfect run there. They have bullshit. There is no perfect run. Every time you go out on the course, the stick is a little different. The tire pressure is a little different. The engine's a little hotter, colder, whatever. Everything's a little different. Ambient temperature's a little different. You're never in exactly the same place at exactly the same speed, pointed in exactly the same direction with exactly the same slip angles on tires. Just not the case. It's very dynamic. And the really good people, there's all these little decisions running around in their brain, and they're making all these micro little input changes, and they don't even know they're doing it. And so it's something like just a little less. You release pressure on the steering wheel a little bit. You just release a little bit of pressure on the brake, or you just release a little bit of throttle or something like that. Less so with the throttle, other than actually in the big power cars, you are doing that quite a bit. And so all those little micro decisions are happening constantly. So when you say, do you ever notice that cone and then kind of do something? I do this a lot in a slalom where you, even though I'm looking farther ahead and I'm moving my eyes forward and backwards, I'll notice I get this funny feeling in my gut, like I think I'm about to hit this cone. And what I'll do is I'll just do a little steering wheel thing, or perhaps usually in a slalom, it's a little bit of either a lift, and I mean a micro lift, and I can just sort of feel the car scooting out of the way of the cone, and maybe it moves an inch, but that is the difference between hitting the cone and being right on the cone. So for me, running a slalom is always these little itsy bitsy micro inputs going on. When you look at the car from the outside, you go, God, that guy's smooth. But inside the car, there's just little stuff going on. And so for me, that's the way you deal with that stuff. And in fact, during the days when I was really, really on the money and focused and really doing a lot with autocross, I would actually aim at cones. I would aim to try to hit cones with my rear tires. And I knew that if I aimed at the cone and I added just a little bit of throttle right before I got there, the cone would move out of my way. We all know that.
That's crazy to hear. John Ames supposedly said the same thing. Aim at a cone and accelerate around it. So that way you know you're at the maximum grip.
Bingo. Yeah. So exact same concept. And I literally would be aiming at cones, and I don't mean aiming them with my front wheels. It's getting around the backside of the thing means you're going to hit it with your rear if you hit it with anything. And if you're accelerating around it, the arc will increase ever so slightly to miss the cone.
Yeah, to get that goes back to that perfect amount of speed for that line.
Yep. And that goes back to that comment I made earlier about Pro Solo, particularly Sunday afternoon. That's when you really can do that to the max because there's a little bit more grip there on that Sunday afternoon, and you can pick up another couple of tenths, maybe.
I think the key to what he just all said was your supercomputer brain, as long as you give it the input by looking ahead, scanning ahead, cheating with your eyes ahead, you can then start to do all this stuff without even really, I guess, thinking through it once you're just a competent driver, I would say. A lot of this is just happening because you know where you're going and what you're trying to get to for the next element.
Yep, exactly.
So that made me think. Video. At what point did video come in for you to look at? Or are you much of a video guy?
Never. I'll take that back. There was a time when Ann and I were really serious with Pro Solo, and it was before good data loggers existed. We used video of our competitors to figure out what they were doing differently than us. And I mean a handheld video, not in the car.
The big one on your shoulder.
Yeah. It was a pretty big video camera. And we would video, so whichever one of us wasn't running would be sitting in the stands videoing the other guy. And then at night, Saturday night, we would go in and we would sync up these videos and look at them and go, okay, this guy's, and by the way, we had no software or anything for putting them side by side. So we would literally take a watch, build a little spreadsheet and go, okay, from here, we did segment times based on the videos. And we go, which segment are they beating us in? And then we look at the video and say, why? Why is that? And we also did it for her and I. We would say, which one of us is going faster here? And why is that? What are you doing? Blah, 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 blah. And that helped immensely. And then that led us into the data acquisition stuff. So it was, I guess, late 80s when the Valentine G Analyst came out. And I got one of those almost immediately. And it came with software that allowed you to put up, the one run and have either the lat or the longitudinal acceleration traces on there. And so being a software guy, I wrote my own software for it where I could basically put up two runs next to each other and compare the two. And I got really good at reading data traces and to the point where we could do it between runs. Or between sessions at Pro Solos, and also between runs at like nationals, solo nationals, and it was super useful for the both of us. There were things. So prior to that, I was usually going faster than Ann was, and she just assumed it was, a couple tenths here, a couple tenths there, a couple tenths there. What we learned from data acquisition in those early days was, no, it's almost always in one place. She was slaloming just as well as I was, transition high speeds, offsets just as well as I was. And her big bugaboo actually was sweepers. She just could not get that corner entry thing into sweepers and roll through the center of the turn. Could not do that. And then roll power coming off. But she would kick my ass in single pin turns, which were showing up quite a bit in those days. So we learned what each of us did better, and each of us would then work on what each of us didn't do well. And so usually by the end of a pro solo weekend, because remember, you've got 3 sets of that data, by the end of the weekend going into the challenge, we both were as good as either of us was going to be. And it was super, super useful. Got her better faster, got me better faster. And I haven't stopped using data since.
Yeah, I need to get back to it, because what you said was so true. When Mary Medicus and I were both doing the TrackMate and the Integra, I would do some things better, and then it came through Extrigan Packwood. A big, huge turnaround of like kind of 2 90s put together. She killed me like a second. The data proved so useful. Now, did you two ride together much and pick up much from riding with each other, or was the data like far and beyond even what you would learn riding with somebody?
We didn't ride with each other as much, only because the cars we were running in those days, the Hondas and stuff like that, in those classes, having an extra, and even in her case, 120 pounds made the car handle different. And so it was useful on a practice day if you were trying to demonstrate a technique or something like that. But it was not particularly useful ride-alongs at regional events or anything like that. And in fact, we treated regional events like national events. I know for me, I've actually often been accused of being standoffish at a regional event where everybody else is just kind of having a good time and all like that. And during my heyday, I treated every single event like a national event. So, and in fact, I always treated it like the second day at nationals. I've got 3 runs to get this done, and I'm behind by a half a second. I have this visualized in my head, and I'd sit down, I had the course in my head, and boom, I would go out and do my first run, come back, go through the whole routine, so that by the time I went to the national event was the same as normal. There was nothing different about it.
That's key, probably for me. I'm not sure who else I can help. But just to have it so there is no difference is huge, because especially for me, most second days are not the days I want to remember. So I appreciate that myself. So that's a mindset that basically you learn it by practicing it over and over at divisionals. How about local events? Kind of similar to local event, or something a little different?
Oh yeah, I would treat all events the same. I mean, I don't do that anymore, but I would treat all events were the same. Divisional, regional, anything. They were all always treated the same. If I'm going to do 3 runs, I'm going to get the maximum out of those 3 runs. Now, that's different from days when I'm trying to test stuff, which happens a fair bit as well. And as I got more and more into setup, I would use regional events if there were no test and tunes, where I would be changing the car on every run, or put different tires on it, change the shocks on it, basically tweaking knobs so that I could understand the feeling and the difference. And so a lot of times I'm making the car worse, but I want to understand that feeling so that if I ever get in the situation when it matters and I get that feeling, I know I can turn this knob this way this much, and this is how I correct that feeling.
And that reminds me, so, you talk to David a lot. When you're making these changes for testing, are you making big, huge changes so you can feel it? And I'm asking because I usually say I can't feel small changes, even sometimes a hollow sway bar on or off. How would I develop that feeling, or how did you develop the feel for those changes?
So that usually to do that level of stuff, you want to be doing a test and tune day where you just don't care, and where you can do lots of changes. And what I always tell people to start with is start with the biggest changes. So okay, take your if you got an adjustable sway bar or you're going to turn it on and off, do a major change. see what the feeling in the car difference is. The same with shocks. If you've got front and rear shocks and they're only rebound adjustable, start with them full soft, take the fronts, crank them all the way up, see what that did. Take the rears, crank them all the way up, see what that feels like. Take the fronts, put them all the way down, see what that feels like. And now you've drawn a box around it, and you know the whole range of what you've got, and you'll feel something significant. Same with tire pressures. If you want to see 2 pounds of tire pressure is rarely going to show up, put 10 pounds difference in. I mean, make a massive difference so that you can see what the general feeling difference is. Then say, is that the direction I want to go? Once you've figured out the direction you want to go, then you back it off and get the actual value you want.
And would you suggest doing at a test and tune day, if you could, make these changes for a sweeper and just do a sweeper over and over, or a friction circle, and then do, let's say, a slalom? That's something I've been thinking about for the next test day is, could I break these things into different elements and make these huge changes? Or is that good for like a beginner that doesn't think they have any feel, or should you just run a course?
Absolutely, test and tune, break it apart. In fact, you'll see an article in the next Grassroots talking about testing and how to do it. I also gave a nice talk at the MXX conference a couple of years when they used to do it. And in fact, I think if you Google on GRM for the old STS2 Project Miata, I had a whole write-up on how we would do testing. But basically, the way we tend to set cars up is we would start with a skid pad, and this goes back to the Evo. What do we call those schools? The dial-ins. We'd set up a skid pad and dial in the steady state handling of the car, and both directions. Try to get it even, and make sure there's no weird things going on with the car. Get basic neutral to slight push, in a sweeper. Then go set a slalom up and run up and down the slalom, working through shocks, which are your basic tool for changing the transitional performance. In addition, you may be making some toe changes, both front and rear, throughout that, and then a series of higher speed offsets, because a slalom is going to do one thing, but oftentimes you can get the car to be really fast in the slalom, and then it's undrivably loose in a high speed transition like an offset. And the other element I like to do is what I used to call the skid oval, where you take what's effectively a skid pad, but you stretch it way apart in the middle, and that adds the acceleration and the deceleration to the skid pad. So that's basically a pair of sweepers. Even better if one's uphill and one's downhill, on a sloped site, even better for that. And you can run that two ways. You can run it with the acceleration and without, or you can just run it at a constant speed like you would a skid pad. So you don't accelerate out, you just drive from one into the other, and that teaches you to feel the turn in and the turn out and what the suspension is doing, independent of the acceleration and the braking. Then you add acceleration and braking to it, and now you can see how that changes things, because now you're moving weight around, not just weight transfer from side to side. You're adding in longitudinal weight transfer to the equation. Between those elements, you can get your car entirely dialed in, and then go on to bigger courses and stuff like that. But that's the way I like to do it.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. That's interesting. Right there when you said take the oval or stretch out into an oval, but keep your speed the same where you're not transferring the weight from front to back. And that makes me think, especially driving the GT3 recently, I kept trying to say, I'm going to trail brake so much to put some weight on the nose. That would be fantastic to try that there, to see if it really helps or doesn't help, or if I can feel the difference of what's going on there. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's interesting. Yep.
And by the way, that's also not just a great setup thing. Even if you change nothing, you can learn about what the car is doing and practice it. One of the big things that I used to do quite a bit of, it's kind of like, I was a drummer, years ago, and we had things called rudiments, which you do these little things on a snare drum, and it just practiced your chops and got you get your brain all around it and got your hands doing the right things. It was always the same thing. The rudiments of solo, all the elements are variations on like a straight line-ish slalom, a series of offsets, sweepers in a number of configurations, and 90-degree turns. And practicing those elements independently can let you really focus on them and not the interconnects. So I used to do, I'd run up and down a slalom line for like 15 minutes. I mean, just run down, turn around, run down, turn around, run down, turn around, run down, turn around, and make, just burn up tires doing it. But you got so good at it that when it came time to run at a pro solo or something like that, particularly in a challenge round, you were like a machine.
Yeah, that's where interviewing David Whitener, that was amazing. Actually, both Whiteners, that the amount of practice they put in to really hone in and, as he said, get good at the sport. Of course, I'm watching it snow outside right now, so it's not going to happen here. I might need a house in Cali, but hopefully it gets a lot of people pumped, going, "Wow, I really need to get to some of these test and tune times," because, like he's saying, if you can run a slalom for 15 minutes, you're going to have it figured out. And as he said, if you can feel it, even if you're not making setup changes, that reminds me of something that this all relates back to Andy, supposedly. This is back when I was still in the Integra and you were in the Civic. I heard, oh, look, Andy's lifting off the brakes here differently. I went off and changed my braking paradigm for a year or two, trying to be smoother on the brakes. And what's crazy is in these elements he's talking about, I think that's also a great place to perfect coming off of a brake pedal. What can you tell me about thoughts on the braking side of things, especially attacking and releasing the pedal?
You're right. So coming off the brake is just as important as getting on the brake. And I know that so many people wait till the last possible second, smash the brake down as hard as possible, which throws all the weight on the nose of the car, and then weird things happen. So it's really about weight management. Particularly, it depends on how you have the car set up, and all of my Hondas over the years have been typically set up for a little bit of lift throttle, either oversteer or less understeer, depending on what I was working with as far as the class rules. And so you could use the on and off both throttle and brake to move the weight around to get the rear end to do what you want or get the front end to stop doing what you don't want it to do. And so, coming off the brake is very much as important as getting on it. It's even more so in a track environment as well.
For the smoothness, because you're basically at higher speeds.
Well, it's higher speeds. You have shifting involved at the same time, and you have more time to do things. I mean, that's my big difference when I compare the track to autocross. Is in track, the inputs per second you do are spaced out longer. When in autocross, the inputs per second, you're making lots of inputs per second, and you're having to evaluate things in your brain and what's going on with the car and all. That goes back to that statement about no perfect run. On the track, there's a lot longer time for every single maneuver and how it affects the car and how things are going and all like that. And the impact of doing this better here allows you to unwind here and roll throttle sooner here and get going faster down there. The impacts are longer. You're not just saving a little piece here and there. They make big differences.
Gotcha. And which foot are you braking with, by the way?
Left.
Do you think you attack the brake pedal, or I'm trying to put you in one camp or the other. Are you a smooth braker? Are you attacking into elements?
Yes. It depends. It depends on the situation. I tend to be a smoother braker. I'm a slow in, fast out kind of guy. I'll give up the entry in order to get the exit. If you go to my little online Andy's Top Autocross Tips thing, too many people play chicken with the cliff, where they want to brake at the last possible second with the absolute max threshold that the car will do in order to gain whatever they're going to do, and then they run over the cliff. It's way better to brake a little bit earlier, then realize you're at the speed you want and just roll back out of the brake, even if you broke 5 feet too soon or 3 feet too soon. And if you're not braking absolute positive maximum, you're not throwing all the weight on the nose of the car. So using it for weight management and it's risk reward with respect to being able to execute the absolute perfect braking thing on every single run. again, getting back to the fact that no run is ever the same. The conditions are never the same. Your position's never the same. So you need to leave yourself the ability to be dynamic and be making those subtle modulations as you're driving.
Nice. I love the run over the cliff. I often tell people, when you're going too hot into these turns, you end up pushing, and that's like easily half a second. Especially if you're new, I swear, people can blow half a second per entry to a turn. I just proved to myself in the GT3 this whole season that overdriving tight sections just is terribly slow, for sure. So I love this run over the cliff. Is it anything beyond the pushing? I just always tell people, hey, you're pushing. You're just scrubbing off all your speed, and your line is getting much wider, costing you lots of time.
Well, it's that, and also just where you're putting the weight and how much you're moving. The GT3 is especially susceptible to that. I mean, I spent a year in the 997.2 GT3, and that car, with the rear engine, all that weight out the back and all that, super susceptible to how much weight was on the front tires and what you could do with it, both on the track and in an autocross environment. And so learning to do weight management is that's the only way you can make those cars work. You can get away with a whole lot more with a car like most BMWs that tend to be 50-50 and stuff like that. You can get away with a whole lot more there because you've got 50-50, and if you move an extra 10% one end or the other, it's not the end of the world. But when you got a car that's maybe 35% on the nose, and you take away or you add in a whole bunch more, the percentage change under braking in that case is huge. So it's important to for that whole weight management to be handling that better.
Yeah, I want to hear you take through this, as in probably not shock it by going so much, or are you trying to trail brake to keep some on there? Even fill up the gas tanks in the front, do you dare run a full tank to help with that? What are some thoughts around that since you spent a year in the car?
To be perfectly honest with you, I never really came to grips. Yeah, I never really bonded with that car that well. It's probably the car I had the least success with, and I don't mean from competition standpoint, but just me and it coming to terms with each other. And I've never, to be perfectly honest, never been great at mid-engine cars either. It's just, and part of that, just never spent a whole lot of time with them. I'm much better in a 50-50-ish rear-wheel drive car. So like C5 Corvettes, I love them. I owned a C4 for a while, and or the front-wheel drive cars. Pretty much any front-wheel drive car, I can drive those just fine. But I'm not the guy to ask about those other things.
But for me, you're the perfect guy because I also have not bonded. And it's just so weird with no weight up there. I want to get on the gas early, and it just pushes right out of the way. I'm like, what is going on? It's totally backwards from the Civic. I feel like I'm like, what? I do want to figure out the magic, but I'm not sure if I'm going to figure that out anytime soon. So
you're going from one extreme to the other. You're going from a car that's got all of its weight in the front to a car that's got all of its weight in the back, and it doesn't get more extreme than that.
Yeah, I even had challenges jumping in the S2000. Although, like you said, the C5 Corvettes, those. It seems like the bang for the buck, that would be a great, fun thing to figure out. I think the S2000 might be a good stepping stone to get there. I wrote down earlier in my notes here, I was wondering, you own the older Vet. Have you autocrossed any or campaigned any for much of a time, or just a lot at the different teaching events you've done? When have you gotten into them?
So both. There was a period of time, so my daily, I sold that Pantera at one point. The car I bought for $16,000, I sold it for $28,000 and thought it was the greatest thing in the world because I got tired of dailying the thing because it was too valuable to really be dailying it. And so I sold it, banked half the money, and bought a C4 Z51 suspension Corvette, autocrossed that. But I wasn't. That was during one of our periods we got burnt out and backed away, and so I was running local events. And that one year, I drove that car. I drove a CRX SI, and I guess that was D stock at the time. And we had a Volkswagen Jetta that was Ann's Daily at the time. Had all three of those cars, and I drove each of them each one of them in a different series. So there was the Harrisburg series, the Baltimore series, and the DC series. And I learned so much that year from jumping between the three cars about how to drive them, the setup, and all like that. Then beyond that, to answer the rest of your question, with C5s, all my experience there was in schools. And there was a period of time when we were doing tons and tons and tons of schools. And every time I got in one of those cars, it felt like home. It just felt like home. It did. You turned the wheel, it did what you expected. You hit the brakes, it did what you expected. It had plenty of throttle, plenty of everything that a car can do. Those cars could do, and those were mostly cars running in super stock at the time on Hoosiers and all. So just love those cars. It's on my sort of top 5 list of cars that I get into and go, hey, these are just awesome.
Yeah, I've only driven one once, and yet there's one sitting in my barn that they would probably let me drive if I so wanted to. So that's so tempting. Even on street tires, watching John Ames still just burn up. He was the overall top winner or our last event. Just looking smooth, obviously still dialed in a C5. Lots of fun.
Yeah, you should do it. You definitely should do it. You will, one, just because it's an iconic car and it's a fabric or a sport and all that kind of stuff, so just for that reason. But also, I think you will definitely love it. They're just great cars.
So you've done lots of teaching, not only from tips that you can tell people listening of, let's say, at the beginner level on up, but what did you get out of all the teaching? Does it help you by sitting there and teaching? Does it help you by driving the different cars? What is your whole take on this, and would you highly recommend more of us to jump in and help out?
Oh, absolutely. Teaching helped me a ton. Part of it was I started doing it for a variety of reasons, but the big thing was just for additional practice for myself, but also because when I got into the sport, none of that existed. And so for me, that was sort of starting to give back. And in fact, the only school I ever went to early on was Dick Turner had a series of schools they were hooked up with, Grassroots. And I went to that, and that's what taught me how to shift when you're left foot braking in an autocross. And it was I learned that from Dick Turner himself. And then I actually started instructing for him when they were in the area, and that moved into a variety of other things over the years with teaching. But for me, it's always been great at reiterating in my mind those rudiments that we talked about. Again, I'll mention again, people can look up, just Google on Andy's Top 10 Autocross Tips or something like that. And that was a series of things I wrote down after teaching a weekend of 3 schools. It was up at Mineral Wells, and we did Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And part of it was frustration of saying the same thing over and over again because the same people were making the same mistakes over and over. But part of it was just to then be able to spread that out there for other people. My biggest personal issue when I'm in a slump is getting lazy with my eyes. And so by instructing, you have to be, one, talking the other guy through the course as to where, and you have to be sort of a half a second ahead of them. You need to be leading them. And that's great practice for yourself as to where you need to be looking and how you're doing it. Secondly, from the passenger seat, because your brain is not having to actually drive the car, you feel more about what the car is doing. Plus, it's your job to feel that and be able to impart that to the student. So I find all of that was incredibly useful. There was anecdotal stuff with respect to being able to feel and experience different cars and different setups and things like that. And then the other place that it helped a lot was, for example, the course analysis. I learned as much that year as the students we were teaching in the Phase 3s because we were analyzing all these different setups, course designs, and I was learning how to read courses even better myself by doing that. Now, all that said, I never teach in the month of August, ever, because I learned that what was happening was, in order for me to demonstrate for a student, I had to drive kind of 90, 95-ish%, which, of course, our 90, 95% is probably their 110%. But what I would find is I would lose the edge in my own car. So the month of August, I would never get anybody else's car. In fact, this last year when I was up at Lincoln, even though I'm not running nearly as seriously anymore, I had a number of people say, "Hey, will you?" Because I was teaching for Evo up there, and they were like, "Hey, will you drive my car?" And I'm like, "Nope, sorry, can't do it. I'll ride with you all day long, but I give you lots of tips. I'll let you ride with me, but I won't drive your car because I don't want that clouding my brain what your car is doing and stuff like that."
Yeah, that's a good way to, once again, zone in and zero in. I break a lot of rules by driving 2 different cars there. Of course, one was a throwaway, it ended up being, but that's so interesting that it hits home with me when you said when you're riding and you're coach or instructing somebody, you are for me anyway. I get my hand and I point like we're looking way over there now or way over here. You can really look even further ahead, I guess, to try to help them, like you said, half a second ahead. And you're so correct about the feelings you get when you're sitting there. I mean, sometimes I get car sick, but otherwise it always feels like the car is so fast. I've ridden with people like, wow, it's fast. And you get out and you're like, oh, it's slower than my time. But that might be something that really help people like me that claim they don't feel much. I do feel a ton more sitting in that passenger seat.
Well, and part of the reason for that is you see things, depending on what your sight and your brain reaction time is, everything's kind of running a half a second behind. So the guy will have made an input, and your ability to sense and see the reaction to that input with the car's reaction to it is at least a half a second behind. So one, you're having to give the instruction almost a full second so that he then has the half a second reaction time to react to hearing you and then do the maneuver at the correct time. So you're always kind of running behind, but more importantly, you have no expectation what's going to happen other than what the car's reaction to it is. So you feel what the car is doing relative to what the guy's input was.
Yes, thus the car sickness. Yes, I need to take more of the pills. So if anything, challenge for most of us, for sure you got to pay attention to be way, way ahead. So like you said, if it's a half second delay, you have to really be looking across that 180 or looking there at Nationals. I remember the test course. Get out of the slalom. He kept saying, get out of the slalom, get your eyes out of the slalom on that little test course. That was kind of amazing where I'm like, we're just now entering the slalom. What are you talking about? But it did work when Brian Peters was saying that. It's like, oh, yeah, for me to have the time to take it in, get your eyes out of it as soon as possible.
Well, and that goes back to the glancing ahead thing and the scanning. So people tend to get target fixation. It happens on the track. It happens in autocrosses. A slalom is a great example of that. People will focus in on the cones right in front of them, and they're like checking the boxes off. And then once they get to the last one, then they look up. It's like, okay, the last cone of the slalom is almost always a throwaway, or it's a turn around me cone into the next thing. Well, guess what? One cone does not define a turn. You need to see the next stuff, and that goes back to that inflection point. Going from one element to another element, the actual turn involves the way the two elements are interconnected. There aren't any cones defining that, but you're actually making a turn. You may even turn one way and back the other way, where there are no cones marking it. Regional courses tend to have way more cones, and they tend to always have, you're almost always, whenever you turn the wheel, there's a cone there. Where better national courses, and as they space out, you will oftentimes be turning the wheel, making an inflection where there is no cone. So you have to somehow figure that out.
Yeah, and that's by cheating ahead, looking ahead to see it.
Exactly, and walking backwards. One of the courses last year at Nationals was like that. Which one was that? Where it was all variations on. Oh, it was Marcus's course on the corn side. Everything was a variation on how wide do you want to set up so that you can end up way over here going in the correct direction, which I ran in a drying condition, so it was even weirder because you're trying to do the wet line minimum distance thing versus the drying thing. It was a complete cluster, inconsistent drying and stuff like that. But that's what that course was all about, was figuring that out. You had to look way over there to know where you're going, but there were no cones that you can even use as reference points to define where am I now and where do I want to be.
Yeah, for people listening, this was a course of huge sweepers, once again, not very well defined. And I seem to remember then you had a little slot to go through or a little tight slalom to get into after the first or second one each time. It was one of those courses where it's kind of challenging to say, where the heck am I looking up to, even though there weren't a lot of cones? Oh, yeah, I've got to see that I got to get through a slot as I'm approaching it from the other side of it, kind of, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a cone where the finish is defined, and the everything up to the last 20% of the turn is undefined, other than where you enter it.
And I wonder if the finish of that one coming through yet another big left-handed sweeper, you could cut distance or add distance into those huge offsets. If that's a place where it was so easy to hang yourself with distance, or was that one where you would have kept accelerating? What was your breakdown thought there?
I think it depends on the car. So for one, that area is downhill off camber, and always it shows up in a lot of the courses we do just because of the way the flow works. It's also a little less grippy there for whatever reason. And so you had to be careful with the difference in speed that you could take in various parts of it. But I think it really depended on the car you were driving. You had a car that really accelerated well, you could actually take a tighter line and then accelerate out of it so long as you were at the maximum speed you needed to be by as you were entering those offsets. But the offsets weren't like right at the beginning. They were kind of farther down. So you had a pretty darn good acceleration run. But that's another one where I would work backwards from and want to look at data, in fact, after the first run or other people's runs in your class with similar cars, work backwards from what speed do I want to be-ish in this position, and can I write a tighter line and still get to that speed at that point? If so, then yes. If not, then you don't want to be accelerating through that or have to be accelerating through that thing. Maybe you can take a little bit wider line earlier and then carry more speed all the way up through what looks like offsets, but in fact, for your car, if you got a lot of grip and less power, it may actually be a straightaway.
Yeah,
so that you treat it like a straightaway, like you would on a track.
Yeah, no kidding. That I remember debating that last little bit of left-handed getting into that section. Like, oh, you could add distance, but would I really want to? And in this case, I was driving the GT3, also in drying conditions, so it was kind of like a lot of all the pre-planning kind of went out the window of, oh yeah, it's still kind of wet, and just can I stay out of the marbles in the dry zone area there. So
yep, exactly.
One thing you hinted at and or mentioned was, he said you're always out of control, or everything's always slightly different, but the getting on the gas, it almost goes without saying, but I feel like we should reiterate it every time. Did you see in the data the person or the run where you were on the gas earlier more consistently was a better run by far?
Generally speaking, yes. Generally speaking. And of course, being on power is tied to unwind the wheel. I mean, that's the mantra when you're teaching. It's unwind and add power, unwind and add power. It's never just power. I should say rarely just power. But it's always unwind, the old string between the wheel. It's like you're unwinding the wheel as if there's a string connected between it and the gas pedal. As you unwind string, that's the amount you can push the pedal down. And that goes back to friction circles and trying to ride the outside of the friction circle from the extremes when it's full acceleration or full braking to cornering, and you got to free some of that up in order to get max power without spinning wheels and stuff like that. But yeah, absolutely, getting on the power earlier is almost always more important than carrying the last little bit of speed into something. Make just bigger difference, particularly in the underpowered cars. I mean, maybe less so in a higher powered cars where you can get away with it. Those are some of the bad habits I was talking about earlier on with the Tiger that I learned. It took me a long time to unlearn that stuff.
Interesting. You made me remember Robert Thorne rode with me once in the Civic, and the only input for the whole run was, well, when you came out of that sweeper, did you hear the engine? You should have opened your wheel a little bit. And I was like, no, I didn't even take that in. I would think for beginners, what I noticed for them, they will sit there and have the tires just yelling at them for that input. So you have to, once again, as you accelerate out, open the wheel, like Andy's saying, as if your pedal and steering wheel are connected. But then there's another level for some of these guys where Robert's basically listening to the engine going, well, it's laboring a little bit. If you just open the wheel like a few degrees, that would help you get down, I guess, more power, accelerate just a little bit faster. It was amazing that he could even, that was part of it, where I'm thinking I usually listen to the tires, but I wasn't paying attention to an engine working a little bit extra.
Right. Well, and in his case, most of the stuff that he's been driving has been on R comps or slicks, even going back to his karting days and all like that. So you don't hear noise coming out of the tires. What you hear instead is the engine laboring, and also from track experience, because you're in the turn longer on the track. So you can hear the engine laboring much more than you're going to necessarily hear the tires. Now, if you're on street tires, yeah, you'll hear it. But that is he's used to hearing that because that's the feedback he gets. At least that's my interpretation as to why.
Yeah, no, great insight. Yeah, and tell us about, how many years ago did you get into more and more track events?
So the track thing started, the very first track event I did was many, many, many years ago. And when I was running Pro Solos and stuff, and they happened to have a track day down at Summit Point Raceway, and I took the car down there, and Ann didn't want me to go, and I went anyway. I had a guy who was instructor. It was a BMW Club event, and a guy was instructor, and he's like, I know you got great card control, so I'm just going to work with you online and where to be looking and stuff like that. And I picked it up really fast. It was no big deal. But I fell victim to one of the things I teach people a lot on right now, which is the very last session of the day. You're tired, your brakes are tired, everything's tired. And to make matters worse, I had a passenger with me who I thought just wanted to ride along. It turns out this gal liked to fancy herself an instructor and was whining to me about where I was braking in turn one. This is at some point, and was still whining about it as we approached the turn in for the next turn. And so I missed my turn in, I missed my braking point, and rode it off onto the tire wall. And the car was, I put the car on the trailer, took it home, and Ann never let me live that down. But it turns out it only had a crumpled fender, but it never went well. But anyway, so fast forward, I didn't really do any track stuff beyond that up until about 10 years ago or so. They built a track south of Austin in San Marcos called Harris Hill Raceway, and it was one of these membership tracks. But it's super cheap. It's super cheap. The initiation fee is not much money at all, and I bought it during a special they were doing. It was refundable, and for $200 a month, I can run as much as I want. I mean, as much as you want. And being a retired guy, I can go down there in a week when there's hardly anybody there, and I got the track to myself, and it's awesome, And so I got into doing it there. Simultaneously with that, our friends Peter Lear and Ian Stewart were getting into the One Lap of America. And we went out to go see them at Texas World Speedway the one year when they came through the area. And it was a pouring down rain off and on day. And these guys were having a freaking ball, even though it's pouring down rain. Now, when's the last time you went to an autocross and it was pouring down rain and people were just having a freaking ball, right? And it turned out I knew a lot of these guys, and I didn't realize. So like Danny Pop was there, Brian and Woody Hare, who I'd raced with Woody years ago. They were there. Oh, gosh, I can't remember. Just a whole bunch of guys that I knew had gone off into kind of the track day world and were doing this sort of thing, or NASA TT and things. And so I'm like, we got to do this. And it took us 2 years before we finally, I actually built a car for the track, because what initially I was running like my ST Civic at the time, and I learned very quickly, it's great going around the turns, and it's boring as all get out going down the straightaway. So I'm like, I can't have that. So I built a car I nicknamed Sneaky, which is basically an ST Civic with a K-Series K20 swap under the hood. We took that to the One Lap of America. I guess that was 2010 maybe. And that was the first year I'd run any other track besides Harris Hill. And a funny story there. In fact, Grassroots just put it back up when I wrote the article for them. This is when I had started writing for Grassroots. And the first track we went to was Road America. And, here I'd only ever driven Harris Hill, where you maybe go 110 in a K-Swap Civic with about 250 horse. And here we go, the granddaddy of them all, Road America, super fast. And the group right before me, guy crashes the car. He's a veteran of One Lap. Crashes his car in Canada Corner, goes over, past all the runoff, over the tire wall, and over the catch fence. And they red flag the whole thing. This all goes down right before I'm about to go on the track. So I am scared to death. But I overcome it. And by the end of that day, and then in the afternoon session, I did super well. By the end of that day, I'm like, this is it. It's just like that first autocross run. I was like, this is what I'm going to do forever. So One Lap of America became the focus of our motorsports program every year since. And it continues to this day, doing that. So since then, they've built the Circuit of the Americas, which makes it even better. And I did the same thing that lots of people do with track days is, I was good at it. And I had all that experience with teaching with Evo, that all that same visual stuff, all that applies in track days. There's some other things you got to do with situational awareness and flags and stuff. But so I started right seating quite a bit early on, and then have since then backed off from that just because, the safety aspects and stuff like that of right seating with people you don't know and things like that. I still right seat at COTA, though, because the group I run with, most of the people we have are really just bucket listers that want to go fast down the straightaway. So we're there more just to keep them safe, but it gives me access to track time at a reasonable cost and stuff. And so having those two tracks close by allows me to get out quite a bit in a variety of speeds, a little clubs track as well as a full-on F1 track. And then we get out to all of the tracks each year when the route gets announced for one lap. I try to get out to them because the other thing I learned early on was that I'm just fine. The speed differentials doesn't matter to me. What gets me is blind turns. And in fact, the third event of that first year at one lap, we went to Hallett, and it has a blind over the crest turn into a thing called the bitch. And I went off. That was first off I'd ever had in the track. Scared the crap out of me. In fact, there's a nice series of pictures with me spewing dirt up and all that ended up in the one lap yearbook for that year. And so I learned quickly that I have to pre-run tracks that have blind turns. Otherwise, I'm just going to tiptoe around in those sections and I'm not going to be fast. So now I get out to whatever tracks I have not yet run for that year. And so that kind of dictates my fall program. And I've actually been going to a couple of the tracks that we're going to be running that I haven't been to before for next year's one lap. And that just snowballed. I mean, we love, and the one lap guys, I mean, boy, I got to tell you, I'll get a little commercial for one lap. If you're into track stuff at all, or even if you're just a motorsports guy, go run one lap of America. It's the best friends, the best motorsports friends you've ever had that you haven't met yet. That's the way I look at it. Summer camp for adults. It is so much fun. And the rule book is all of one page. You can do whatever you want to the car other than one set of tires. Don't care. Have fun, but you got to live in it for the whole week. So enjoy that. So make it too stiff, make it too loud. That's your problem. You got to live with it. So we love those guys and the whole track day experience. So that's kind of it.
I want to see if you get Eric Strolnick's out there. We were chatting about it when Robert Thorne was around, and Robert had the watch from winning last year, I believe. And Eric just wasn't really yet convinced yet. I think you could probably work on him a little bit.
Yeah, oh no, Eric and I have chatted about this a lot, and just his personal life has come and gone with the opportunities to do that, and or having the right cars to do that with, and I full well expect to see him out there at some point. But it is it's a great experience. I mean, Eric gets down to Dakota. I see him out there sometimes, and there's some other guys that are regulars that you'll know from the autocross community. Rob Irish, John Pomeranke, the guys from Cobb. They're down there a lot. And some other folks. Yeah, it's a great track to have in your backyard.
No kidding. I love the $200 a month, race as much as you want. I need a place in San Marcos. I always knew it. I knew it. So you're a video game software developer. Do you play any video games at this point to learn any of these tracks at all?
Negative.
No.
So it's funny because people, they're like, well, what, you did all these combat flight simulators, and that's what you're known for. And why did you do racing games? And the issue I had with racing games at the time, particularly back in the Commodore 64 days, was that everybody's driven a car. And most motorsportsy people have driven a car fast, probably on the street, whatever, or too fast even, and they know what it feels like. Well, with these little computers we were dealing with, you couldn't impart that feel to somebody. But almost none of these guys have flown at all, or B, certainly flown a combat fighter jet in a combat situation. So you could do a lot of smoke and mirrors to make them think that they were doing those things. And by giving them enough of the realistic cues from what those planes would do, you didn't have to have a full motion simulator or something like that. And in fact, I was just at the Porsche Experience Center. They had the grand opening here last week out in LA. And they have a whole room full of simulators, and they're not full motion, but they have force feedback wheels and the pedals and all like that. And I had the guy load up Coda, and I couldn't drive my way out of a paper bag on the thing. It was, the brake feel was so wrong, the steering wheel was so wrong. And I tried a variety of cars, and it wasn't that. And I just, I would have had to have gotten my head around how to learn how to drive on a simulator, but it wasn't going to help me with anything else, which goes back to the reason why I just go to the tracks. If I want to learn a track, I'll just go there. So, it's just done none of it.
Okay, now it's just interesting that the people that are younger that grew up with the force feedback wheels and such, it's just amazing how they seem. I'm not sure if that's the whole key, but it seemed part of the puzzle for them to hop in autocross and be going pretty quickly. I'm amazed at how they say they learn setup and things, even though the setup might be totally backwards. But they learn to tweak on those things. And I can agree with you of trying to drive. I was in some newer Civic, 4-speed back wheel, and it was wet. I couldn't keep the car on the course. I was like, this would be so much easier in real life. And then with the pedals, they've told me, oh, you can get better pedals and stick things behind the brake pedal so you have some feel, and just on and on what I guess you can do to feel. And this is something I forgot to bring up earlier. For me, I was like, oh, if I want to play around with right foot braking, the video game doesn't have a clutch. So I'm like, I can do it here just like on the street. You mentioned lifting a little bit. Do you have a lift instead of just a left foot brake? Do you actually just lift sometimes and not brake?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Again, you go back to the Andy's Top 10 autocross tips. Sometimes just a lift, an earlier lift is way better than a later brake. If you think about what that does with weight transfer, that's why. You lift a little earlier, the weight does not move as much. You keep the weight where you want it. You still slow down some using engine braking, right? And you're braking with the front wheels, not with the rears. But the key part is you're not throwing a bunch of weight for it, where you wait a little too long and then brake. Well, now you just moved all this weight, and the car may not handle the way you want.
And the Civics don't handle at all at that point usually, which is where co-drivers that don't left foot brake, I swear in the Civics, once you wait past that point, you're pretty much done. So that's huge. I don't hear many other people saying that, and I realized a few years ago I don't do that. That's what I'm trying to learn is, can I have a pause and sometimes in my tool belt just lift sometimes. I think that's huge, and you've proven it with all the championships and Pro Solo wins as well.
Yeah, in fact, that was, when I go back to the ST Civics that I set up, and even some of my track cars, those cars are set up with lift rotation, where just that slight lift will aid the rotation, and the amount of the lift will set it up for exactly how much of that rotation that you're going to get, and it's super, super powerful. And when I do slaloms, I do what I call the foot dance. Whitener continually beats on me, telling me, hey, you're doing it wrong. But it seems to work for me, and I'm always making those little micro adjustments, and sometimes it's a slight lift. Sometimes if I get a little behind and my eyes are getting lazy, particularly late in the day, I'll actually do a little stab. And the reason for that is the sooner you catch back up in a slalom to kind of the right position that you need to be, the optimal position, the better it is. And so sometimes it actually takes a stab to slow you down enough where you can intercept the optimal line again. Where if you just try to yank the wheel harder, God, please, this once, give me more turning, which is what most novices do. God never responds to that, and so it's a getting off the power or even a quick stab. Works for me, but I'm not a dragger through the brakes. Like I remember Kevin McCormick used to do that. Every time I threw a slalom, the lights are on the whole way. It's just on the whole way, and I don't do that at all.
Yeah, and Bob Tennell also would touch the brakes, although I swear he was loading the nose each time throughout the slalom.
Sure.
I was like, why are you doing that? You're tapping. He's like, oh, I'm trying to load the nose each of those cones. And as you say, getting back online, especially if there's an acceleration zone after the slalom, it seems like so many people hang themselves toward the end of the slalom where they should be accelerating out because there was slightly better line in the midsection, is what I like to say.
Yeah, they're getting further and further behind. So back to you mentioned Bob. So you got to remember, what's Bob driving?
Yep.
Bob's typically driving a BMW. It's a 50-50-ish car, right? And so loading the nose is putting a little bit more weight on the nose to get it to the front tires to bite. On the Civic, you're overloading the front tires typically anyway because it's the drive wheels. See, so adding that extra weight isn't necessarily what you want to be doing at that moment.
Yeah, good point. And hopefully this will help some people. I've made so many assumptions, I do just copy the fast people, not even thinking what platform I'm in, where I just go, oh, Andy's doing that? Oh, I'm going to do that. Oh, wait, which car is he in versus me? Something Andy mentioned there, I've not had a car that I've ever driven do this, but I was in Patrick Washburn's car years ago when it was still ST trim, and he would lift, and it would rotate in a sweeper, and I was like, what the heck? And Andy, that's what you were saying you have your car set up to do. I would imagine if I could get a car set up like that and learn it, that would be magical. That just a slight lift, it actually rotated to help turn, thus cutting distance in my mind.
Absolutely. I mean, and and it goes back to that whole thing of aiming at the cones. So you would basically, like a series of offsets, you'd be turning in early. an early turn for a late apex, if you will, and trying to hit the cone with your back wheel. But as a result of that slight lift, the rear wheel would move around the cone. And then you go right back to the power as soon as you've cleared it. And now you haven't lost anything really in speed other than that lift gave you a little more slip angle in the back. It got the thing to turn around the cone, and you missed the cone. And by running it that way, you run a set of radiuses that are more open, which will allow to carry more speed along that more open radius throughout that maneuver.
Yeah, as you said, I remember David Fouth mentioning if you can get the rear to rotate, you're keeping the wheel straighter, which is exactly what you said in a different way of saying that. If the car rotates for you without turning the wheel, you're keeping it straighter for those different, I guess, larger arcs or straighter lines.
Yep, exactly.
Someday I'm going to get one of you guys to help me figure that out. It's so weird that
it's too bad you didn't drive one of my old cars because they were set up. They were all set up that way.
Yeah, so. This one I got from Tim Smith, I kept trying to make it looser, put the bigger bar. I don't remember what toe out I got, but eventually I just gave up. I was like, no, I'm being pretty competitive. Quit playing with the car. But it was
here's the thing. It's not about the rear bar. It's about the shocks. So that's a dynamic transition. Yes, the rear bar. The people get in, and again, go to the Hollis Racing site, read the setup notes, and even if you're not even just doing a Civic, go read the setup notes on there. I've had this conversation with lots of people. You got to remember, on a front-wheel drive car, you got so much of the weight on the nose. By the time you lift that inside wheel, or at least unload it, you do that in the first third of the turn. So for the rest of the turn, you can't transfer any more weight off the inside rear wheel. So a bigger bar, all that does is it controls where in the turn, is it the first 20%, the first 30%, the first 40%, when is all that weight going to transfer? That's all you're controlling with that rear bar or more rear spring. And what I found with those cars, particularly the CRXs, is if you did too much of that, the car would tank slap. So what I would do from a feeling standpoint, I divided the turn-in point, because again, by the time you get halfway into the turn, all the weight's off regardless of what you do. And I would divide it into the first half of corner entry and the second half of corner entry. And for me, I would set up the car with shocks, a lot of rear shock, in order to get the first half of corner entry where the car is rotating. And I would use less rear bar, less rear spring, in order for the car to catch itself. And that allowed the car to do that little lift thing, and then it would catch itself. Lift, catch, lift, catch, lift, catch. And allowed you to be very aggressive. It would be very fast in a slalom. But more importantly, you could drive through a series of offsets without losing it, which, a series of offsets is usually where people who have cars set up with great big rear bars and lots of rear spring on those would typically lose it if they got it all behind the car whatsoever. The car would just, spin out. And once it starts spinning in that situation, there's nothing to catch it. On the other hand, if the car's basic balance is slightly understeery, but you use shock as a transitional during the turn-in period to get the looseness, then the car catches itself. Rear toe can also be very valuable in that regard as well, because you induce an artificial slip angle in the outside rear tire by having it towed out some.
Gotcha. And did you have single or double adjustables on that Civic?
Double adjustable custom valve Penske's.
Yeah, and that's where you were probably able to dial in the shock changes to really refine that.
Yes, although I learned that when I had yellow conies on it. Now, the yellow conies I had were the SPSS valved conies, which, going back to the earliest days, I'm familiar with those shocks because we had one of the first 3 sets of prototypes back when it was T.C. Klein Racing and Dean Dodge at Coney. He was the Lee Grimes of the time, and they developed that valving for T.C. Klein's road racing showroom stock efforts, and we had those on the car then, and I was very familiar with that valving, and we in fact, it might even been the same damn set of shocks that we were running. First time we built an ST Civic was with those things. But you can do it with those too. And you stuck with off-the-shelf compression damping, but the SPSS valving had a lot of compression built into it. That was part of the magic there.
So the magic here is you could do that with rebound. You could adjust the rebound to make that so, and the toe out.
Exactly.
Okay. Since we're in a little bit of ST talk, If I had you to choose right now, Civic, CRX, or Miata, or would you have to play with each one of them?
Yeah. They're all different, and they all do different things. And they all take a slightly different driving style. So let's do the easy one first. We'll do CRX and Civic. For one, the best CRX and the best Civic are not that difference in weight. So if you get the Japan-built Civic Si, of which there were a limited number out there, the JHME cars, if you will, those cars, because they can run a little bit less gas and stuff like that, it only amounts to it was like 30 to 50 pounds weight difference. No, I take it back. It's actually more. I'm comparing to the early and the late Civics. No, it was the CRX. I don't remember the numbers. The bigger thing, though, is the wheelbase. The bigger thing on those two cars is the wheelbase. And when it comes to handling, the CRX SI, that shorter wheelbase is harder to be consistent with. And it's harder to get that setup like we just talked about, to be really, really dialed in on every surface. So you might get it dialed in on your home lot, and then you go to Lincoln and it sucks. Or you may get it dialed in at Lincoln on concrete and you run a sealed asphalt surface and the car is just undrivable. So it's a lot more picky, where the Civic, you can come up with a setup on there that only takes, a couple clicks on the shock difference or maybe one hole in a sway bar difference to move from a completely different surface, and that's all it takes. The other difference, while the CRX SIs are lighter, their engines, the 88s, don't make as much power. The cam is different. It's basically the valve timing, the cam timing on them they're ground differently. And a legal 88 CRX SI motor does not make as much power as a legal 89 Civic Si motor. So the weight difference is somewhat offset by the motor difference. So honestly, of the two, the Civic is the more predictable car, where the CRX might be ultimately faster for one or two runs if you happen to get the glory runs. So if you're running Pro Solo, maybe the CRX, because you get 12 shots at it, right?
Yep.
I went to the CRX platform solely once I got into the track because it has way better aerodynamics. That's why I went to that platform for the track, where the Civic does not. Now, as far as comparing that to the Miata, I did a bunch of analysis on that when I started building the STS2 Miata, and on paper, the Miata should be better. But the big difference there, and David's done a lot of research on this recently, was the whole differential, the viscous limited slip differential. If you can get that to work right for you, it lets you put power down better. And so even though the gearing wasn't quite as good on the Miata, you could do a lot with that. Plus, it's a normal car. So, so you put a bigger front bar on it, it rolls less and it pushes more. You put a bigger rear bar on it, it rolls less and it oversteers more. I mean, it's just, you turn the knob this way, it does what you expect. Front wheel drive, you got to try it. You just never know. So I liked it for that reason, because it allowed me to do testing in a more theoretical based fashion, as opposed to the Hondas. You were guessing at stuff constantly.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, knowing that David's got a Miata as well now, it's kind of like crazy. It's like, please don't beat us too bad if it's truly that much faster. You seem to think it was. The other thing I'd say is...
Well, that's my old car. That's my old car. Yeah.
And did you have a Mega Squirt in there? Because that seems like a plug and play at this point. They made so many of them for track use.
Yeah, I did not at the time. That was not yet out there, plug and play. I was investigating, trying to figure out how to do that myself, and that was right about the time that we ended up selling the car. I found that with those cars that they are their most valuable right after you win everything. And both when I sold my ST Civic and when I sold that car were right after I'd won a whole bunch of stuff with them those years, championships, and they were their most valuables. And I got, when somebody waves enough money in your face, you're like, you know what, fine, take it. And then you try something different. Well, plus the other thing is, once you've won, and these were both cars I won the overall with, Pro Solo overall, which was the thing I cared about the most. Once you've won that, you're only going to go downhill. Well, the only thing you can do the next year is match it or do worse, right? So I'm like, let me try something different, Yeah,
a great easy time to make that transition to, we'll try something out different. Just because I don't remember looking at the years. Did you win those back-to-back ever?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah,
because I think I always tried something different.
Yeah, the chances of doing that, just to run the gauntlet to even be able to have the chance to be in the top 5 or 10, although the last couple of years have been really odd where people that were below 10th going in end up winning. Because once again, the competition just, man, sometimes getting out of your own class to make it to the challenge at the finale is quite challenging.
Yeah, agreed. So now that I'm thinking about it, I know that I did not win back to back to back because all three were in different cars. So I won one in the ST Civic. I won another in the which actually the first one was in the STS2 is what the class was at the time, the Miata, and then the third one was in the Mazda 2, which is that's a funny story because that was a year I was really trying to take off and not really do much that year and just kind of back away. Which I bought that car after I sold the Civic, something to replace, daily, go get parts kind of car and stuff. And so I threw some stuff on it, and we were also at the time I was on the SEB of the Stack, and it was a class we had just created, and I was trying to help stymie growth of it and stuff, and not make it yet another Honda class, which people thought originally. So built the car for STF. And went to, I guess, Pro in Blytheville and promptly won the Super Challenge. And the thing with winning overalls, there is still a fair bit of luck that goes involved, just the way the luck of the brackets works out and stuff like that, who shows up at an event and all those kinds of things. And after I won that, it's like you have to take advantage of it. If you've got a challenge win that year, it's worth it then, if you care about winning the overall, it's worth it then to arrange your schedule, figure out ways, depending on how they're scoring the points that year, to get to more events and set yourself up for success in those super challenges. Because the opportunities just don't come along very often. And so I was actually, the first words out of my mouth after I won it were like, damn it, now I have to get serious this year. And I honestly didn't really want to get serious, but I'm like, I got to get serious. And so I did the whole full-on prep, got a custom header and all this other stuff we did to the car that year, but I really had not planned on doing it. And that's why when the year was done, I'm like, okay, done with racing this car. I can't do it again. It was reasonably fun, but it was not exciting. So.
Oh yeah, and this doesn't have to be a transition to Tom O'Gorman. I saw your post on Facebook about he went out there and set a track record in a car with more power, and your reply was, see, you can get shaky hands with more power. You've been quite involved with Tom recently with his racing. Can you tell us some about that?
Yeah, and so it's kind of the way that I listened to your podcast with Tom, which is a great one. If people haven't listened to it, they should. So Tom and I didn't really know each other that much. I mean, I knew who he was in pleasantries and stuff at events and things like that. And I'd followed his rise, if you will, in the sport, and also his early crowdfunding effort the first year that he started doing a little bit of Pirelli World Challenge part-time. And he just called me out of the blue, knew that I was, I lived in Austin. He was looking for somebody to help him out in crewing for him, wrenching on the car, because Tom would be the first to admit that he's not a particularly great wrench. I tell people just like, don't even let him look at the toolbox, just stay away. And this was the Coda and all like that. And what I found was it was super fun. I really, really enjoyed it because I've always enjoyed the technical side of setting a car up and the whole event thing. And it turns out I actually know quite a number of people in Pirelli World Challenge, which it wasn't so much at that event that I realized it, but a previous event when Pirelli World Challenge first came to Coda, and I walk through the paddock and I go, oh, I haven't seen you in forever. And these are guys that used to autocross or whatever, and they went on to track day stuff either as crew chiefs or drivers or whatever. I had no idea they were doing it. And so I knew quite a large number of people in the paddock. I also knew the guys from One Lap of America that always have the, from Honda, that have the Odyssey minivans they used to run in One Lap. Well, they moved into Pirelli World Challenge with the Accords. And so I would see those guys. So all those things kind of went together. And then at that first event, it was hard work too. I mean, that first event, the car came in and we had to get tech done for the year, season tech, and they gave us this list of like a dozen things that needed to be fixed on the car. And Because that car, they bought it from another team, and it had been run hard and put away wet, and there was a lot of sketchy stuff on it. And so a lot of hard work to get it through tech and stuff. But I loved the experience. It was just so much fun being there and being part of it. And the other side that goes with it is Tom's just a phenomenal driver. And it's not just, and this is the thing that I really noticed that weekend, because Tom was running on a budget and has been all year, where he doesn't run what they call the promoter day, which is the test day they always have. So it would be like going to the tour and never running on the practice course. And if the practice course was the same as the regular course, I mean, it's like that. He would only ever go out on the first real day of competition, which starts with a single practice session, and then you go to qualifying. And this is a guy that hadn't run most of these tracks, including COTA. And I gave him, my background. I had a lot of laps there, and I told him, here's some things and all like that. But he picked it up super fast. So he's great at that skill set of picking up new tracks. Yes, we all know he's a great wheelman. That's a whole, that's sort of a given. But he's super smart in race tactics. I mean, we would talk about what are you thinking of doing, and especially afterwards. I mean, he always has a plan, but he's super good at being dynamic, at seeing a situation evolve and responding to it in a way that gives him an advantage. So, for example, in Pro World Challenge, the Beast-Quebec, there's 3 classes that all run together in touring car. One is touring car, the fast ones. Then there's touring car A, touring car B. And TC and TCA always come through the B-Spec field at least once during the race. So by using them, you can use them for aerodynamic advantage in certain places and or setting up picks and things. It's like a reverse pick where they end up slowing the guy who's behind you down, or conversely using them and getting behind them to make a pass over a guy that you haven't been able to pass using the other faster car who's going around the guy who's in front of you, and now you're in front. He's really good at that kind of stuff. So I was super impressed with it. Liked his parents a lot, who were both there as well. And he was looking to get, I guess he did 5 races last year, was looking to get some help. And I said, you know what? I'll volunteer. I looked at my schedule. I said, you know what? I'll volunteer to do Miller, and I'll do the finale as well. And had a ball. Just had a ball the whole time. And the other part that goes with that is Renee Hines, who's his crew chief and a good personal friend of his. Renee and I work together really well. We're like finishing each other's sentences. We're saying the same things. We're both saying, hey, let's go put gas in the car at the same times. I mean, our brains are so much on the same wavelength that it's just a wonderful team environment. And in fact, I looked at the schedule for next year, and Tom's working some deals right now. We don't know what's going to happen, but I told him if he needs me, I have cleared my schedule, and I will be available for all races next year. So we'll see if that happens. I'm way on the back end of my motorsports career, if you will, and just enjoying being around it and stuff. And this is a way to do that, and it's been super fun.
So let's say he says, I can't use you next year. What would it take to get you into one of those races or into a series?
I wouldn't. I don't have the desire to do wheel to wheel myself. I had the opportunity a number of times over the years, and I stayed away with it. One because, I had kids and stuff, and I was working hard, and the risk reward there with somebody ruining your day was very, in a way that it could cause bodily harm and stuff was bad. But also that goes with that is, you've seen my cars and the attention to detail that I put into them. They may not always look the best, but, I spent a lot of time doing setup work and putting the right parts on them and all like that. And so often in road racing, particularly at grassroots level, everybody thinks they're freaking Dale Earnhardt and Rubbins racing and blah, blah, blah. And they use you for brakes at the end of a straightaway. And it's like, they punch you off the track, or they try to squeeze you when they really shouldn't and stuff. And it's like, you know what? I don't really want to be a body man. And the guys that I knew back in the early days when I lived in Baltimore that were going down to Summit Point, a lot of them IT racers, that's what they did. They spent their off time doing body work. They weren't working on, hey, let me try some different spring rates, different shock valving. They were doing body work on the car. I'm like, that's not my idea to have fun. So you won't ever see me do it. I could, but in fact, these days I got way more resource to do it and the time to do it, but I just don't have the desire. I love wheel to wheel. Don't get me wrong. The couple of times that I've done stuff like that, I really enjoy the mano a mano kind of thing with dicing and things like that. Love that. But I don't like the other parts that go with it that are wrapped up in that. Not my thing.
Luckily, we still have autocross for you. So you just mentioned about alignment. Is an alignment something you recommend people ever do with smart strings, or should we be taking our car somewhere to get it aligned? What are your thoughts around that?
Depends. I learned very early on, and again, part of this was just financially. I had no money to be paying an alignment shop all the time. I learned very early on how to do them myself. So on the Volkswagen was when I first did that, and I learned how to build a trammel bar to measure toe, and I had a camber gauge that I bought. It was really kind of a cool little thing. Not nearly as sophisticated as today's, but it was an interesting one that I actually purchased that one. Probably could have made one just like it, but I purchased that. And those cars you couldn't do it on the rear anyway, so it didn't really matter. So I learned early on how to do that. I still do. I'll still do alignments. I have toe plates and I have camber gauges and stuff like that. That said, I have a long-standing relationship with a local shop called Soul Speed Performance, and Colin down there does all of my alignments when I really care about it. So I use that to get a baseline. So I'll take it down there, get the car all squared up. And I might even do things like, okay, for example, rear of the Civic, each of these little notches here, how much is that? What is that on your gauge, on your alignment rack? What is that? And I'll write notes down as to what it is. And now, like on the track cars, most of them have Heim jointed suspensions. So I'll figure out, okay, one turn of the Heim is how much, of a change. And that way at the track, I can make changes knowing what I'm getting when I do them. And I'll oftentimes at the track, I'll check the front toe just to see where it's at, because you bang on curbs and things like that. But it won't be my, I'll have gone to his place once a year or whatever. Now, that said, that only works because I've got a guy with a great, relationship we've had who does what I'm asking for and does and he's not sort of phoning it in, which is what you get if you go down typically to the local tire store or whatever. A lot of times those places will have their alignment racks set up with a very wide tolerance before the thing will go green and say you're in alignment. And they may even have cranked up the granularity on the thing so that it only goes every other tenth of a degree or something like that. You're not even getting tenths of the degrees of things and stuff. They do that to make things go faster for them. They're not nearly as diligent as you need. So if that's going to be the case, then you're better off learning to do it yourself.
Yeah, good point. I like that you said you even went to spec, okay, exactly when I turn this one turn, what am I going to get? So if you're in your garage, you kind of know, okay, if it's this much, I'm measuring this. You have a clue what you're actually adjusting. Did you ever find yourself at events doing that? Because I see lots of people, but I can't remember you specifically. Have you changed toe in such a different events?
All the time. All the time. Now, that said, after a while, I got the setup kind of dialed in. But I know exactly how many turns. Well, actually, I have to look at my phone to see what it is, but I have notes on exactly how many turns it is and stuff like that. Usually it's during a practice session I'm doing it, but it might have been at a Pro Solo, for example, where Saturday morning the car's doing something funny, particularly if it's a new site that I've been to that I've never run on before and I have no baselines, in my notebook. And I keep, used to keep notebooks on all the sites and stuff like that. And that those got, when I sold those cars, the notebook went with it. And along with a year's worth of consulting. But yeah, I do that. I adjust the car all the time at events in order to match the situation. But I've already done the homework. I already know if I'm feeling the car doing this and I make this adjustment, I get this result. You already know the equation. It's not I'm trying to figure out the equation. I use dedicated test days to figure out the equation.
Yeah, once again, your feel of, okay, it's too loose or too tight, I know I can turn this 2 times each on the rear and get this kind of toe out or toe in or some shock adjustment.
Yep.
So move us into the grassroots relationship. You had kind of mentioned, obviously you've been doing this for quite a while. What all do you do? How did you get in the door there?
I can't even remember now the very first article I did for them. I've known Tim since the dark ages. I mean, the very first issue of the magazine, I knew him back then. We were actually involved in a thing called CMC, the Council of Motorsports Clubs, where this was like before NASA. It was kind of like him trying to build a thing like what NASA became. As far as call it competition for SCCA, but it was more like just having another sanctioning body doing events because there feels like there needs to be more events and or different kind of events. And they used to specialize a lot in one of the big things back in those days was street events. Towns would close down streets and they would do street autocrosses, street solos, and CMC did a lot of those. And I was involved with them there. So, I want to say the very first one I actually did was when Per Schroeder was doing a tire test. I was looking for a venue to do it, and they had opened up another track here in town, which I failed to mention already, which is called Driveway Austin, which is not a competition track. It's strictly a motorsports academy, and I used to instruct for them quite a bit when they first opened up. And we used that as a venue to do a tire test. And Per was basically driving that back when he worked for the magazine. I provided the car and a bunch of wheels and tires, and we put all the tires on it and did that test. And I really enjoyed the experience. Kind of the rest is history from that as far as doing it. And we in that test, even though it's a track, what they call the L1 there is a relatively small autocross-ish thing. You don't get out of third gear usually. And we were able to cone up a couple, like the one straightaway. We put a 7-pin cone down there, and slowed it down through there, and got some transitional data. And we did segment times and all, and got great data. And that was the first test, and that mushroomed into more testing articles. I also started doing a column. They were looking for somebody to write up the national series events. Every issue we'd have, and since I was going to all events, it was natural for me to do it, because looking at results online doesn't tell you the whole story of what's going on with weather or competition, breakage, all that kind of stuff was the interesting parts, and did that for a while, and then that got us into additional testing like the muffler articles and the STS2 Project Miata that happened for that. And usually it was something that was dovetailing with my own personal program. And so even though people would say, hey, let's do some testing on Mustangs because that's more important for them because they own one. But those things cost money and they take time and all like that. And if it meshed with my own program, I was willing to front those expenses and time, where trying to arrange a different kind of car and those other kind of things, I wasn't getting out of it myself either, and so it was hard to justify it other than writing the articles. Because GRM really doesn't pay much for those things. It's more a labor of love. And nowadays it's all about giving back and that kind of stuff and helping other people. And it's also opened up a number of relationships and doors. I mentioned earlier about going out to the Porsche thing for the Experience Center. I just, a couple of weeks prior to that, I was out at Continental, had a new... they're replacing the Continental DW, and I went out to a weekend there with a big introduction. Got to drive on the thermal track in Palm Springs and drive those tires comparing to other tires. I'm about to do the same thing for Michelin for their new Pilot Supersport. Those kind of opportunities started showing up as a result of the magazine. Different relationships with parts suppliers and things. So it's a very synergistic thing. So I'm willing to put the time into it. But the engineer in me, which is what I was trained as, loves the process. And so I really enjoy kind of honing in on this stuff. So it ended up, working out really, really well.
And I heard in your thermal track, what is that?
Oh, it's the name of the track. Now it's called the Thermal Club, and it's in Palm Springs, which, thermal, you get the whole thing. It's hot. It's in the desert. It's just another track that's out there. It's one of these little country club style tracks. It's a super high end one though. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's one of those kind where like the initiation's like $10,000 and you pay $100 every time you come out and stuff like that. And it's way oriented towards high end clients. That ain't me. But anytime I get a chance to drive another track, I'm always up for that experience.
Nice. And what is your current one lap car?
Which one? So I'll just give you so I think we're running the McLaren again, that was plan B for this last year. And it was a deal that completely fell into my lap, to where I don't think I can ever lose money on the car. But that's a car that was driven hard and put away wet by its previous owner, who's personal friends with the owners of Circuit of the Americas. And so it's been to like every single track day ever there, including all the private days. So it's got a lot of track miles on it, and it's showing it. So it's constantly in the shop getting stuff replaced. And we ran into a bunch of that during one lap. But, so the CRX was the big one for a number of years. And we finally got to the point where Ann just couldn't deal with it anymore because it's kind of stiff on the street and things and loud and vibrates a lot. And then I built a Miata with a Honda motor in it, which was, even early in its development was already faster than the CRX. And then I had a rod break on that right before one lap this past year. And we still don't know why that happened. And I was reluctant to just put another motor because I had a whole nother short block sitting there ready to go in the car. And I'm like, I don't trust it because it's built the same way with the same parts. It was one. Usually I build my own engines, and that one I paid pro to do it, and it broke. And so I'm now like, I don't know that I want to do that again. And this deal for the McLaren fell into our lap. And so like, you know what? I'll just do this. This sounds like fun. And now I love the McLaren. I mean, it's the best triple threat car I've ever had.
Best? Would you say a best what?
Triple threat car.
Oh,
so
okay.
A car that is great on the track. It actually isn't bad as an autocrosser. And I didn't buy it to autocross it, but we had an autocross last season during one lap, and I was expecting it to be crap because it's got a really long wheelbase. It's got really small front wheels and tires, and a non-adjustable suspension. You get like 1.5 degrees of front camber, and I was like, okay, it's going to suck. And it didn't. It actually was not bad. But more importantly, on the highway, it's got an electro-hydraulic suspension, that you can dial up and down. The thing is phenomenal on the highway, driving around town. Other than the crowds that go around it, it's just a great driving car. I just love the experience in that car, and so I really want it to be our answer for this year for one lap, but I'm not sure. It's in the shop as we speak right now, so I told myself I would give it a year, and if not, I'll sell it. But it's way better than my GT3 ever was. It's faster on the track, it's a better autocrosser, and it's way better driving around town. They're about equal on the highway, but it's way better driving around town.
And Ann goes on one lap with you?
Oh yeah, that's always been that's been part of the deal. Is it's something we can do together. Once we kind of started transitioning our program from one to the other, it was something we could do together. And she helps drive all the transits. She doesn't do any of the actual competing, which of course now she can't due to the car accident. But we do it together, and it's funny because like any couple that's been married as long as we have, which has been it's like 35 plus 37 years, some crazy number. We have our ups and downs, and marriages always work. It's usually the single best week of our whole year. We know we're stuck in the car together the whole time. So we cut each other slack. We're working to a common goal. We have learned a vocabulary to talk to each other. We know when each other's getting tired or hungry and grumpy or whatever. And plus we have all of our friends out there and all. It's so much fun. It's always a great time. She's a massive part of it. And now she has sort of found her own niche within the whole one lap crowd. She's the cookie lady. So, we don't provide cookies for the whole field because we couldn't, but those of us who have been around for a while, Ann bakes tubs of homemade cookies. They get passed out on the first day. And that's sort of sustenance for a lot of folks. Some of them go through them in a day, and some of them will ration them for the whole week. But she makes cookies for everybody.
What flavors?
Anything and everything. I mean, her favorites for me are, of course, Toll House chocolate chip cookies and oatmeal raisin and shortbreads.
Oatmeal raisin,
but
okay, that's all I need to hear.
Yeah, but she has all kinds of other ones that she does, and every year she has a few new ones that she does. They started with Christmas cookies. I mean, these are all the things she makes for Christmas. And then little by little, and it's also each year, all of our sponsors here in town, we take them plates of cookies, and so and they still talk about it. Like I was just up at Automotive Specials the other day, and they're like, "So, Zan gonna have her knee done so you can do these cookies, or what's going on there?" So,
and he's like, "No, I'm gonna have to make them this year. Just bear with me."
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So tell us. Partial maybe wrap up is for one lap. I thought, oh, that sounds cool until I heard sleep. am I going to get some sleep if I do this for a week?
Depends on how good you are. So the way it works, so the distance of one lap is effectively the distance of the original Cannonball stuff that Brock Yates used to do, the Cannonball Baker Sea to Shining Sea Memorial Trophy Dash that Brock Yates used to do it started in, I guess, Connecticut and drove all the way to Southern California. And it's about 3,800 miles across the country, depending on your route. So the route is always 3,500 to 3,800 miles of driving that you've got to do over the course of a week. And there are tracks interspersed along the way. And most of them are road courses, but usually we'll throw an autocross in there, sometimes a circle track. We almost always have a night at the drag race. The drives can be anywhere from, 10 hours down to 6 hours, and depending on where you are. Now, you don't always get out at the same time. Generally speaking, there's a morning session at the track. You get some time, a break at lunchtime, and then you do an afternoon session at the track. And then you leave as soon as you're done. In the order, these are time trial sessions where you do 3 hot laps and then pack your car up and leave for the next track. And the order for that is a seeding order that's established early in the week. So the very first track session is kind of like qualifying, if you will, for the week, and that seeds the field. So the fast guys get to run first in the afternoon, and they typically go out 3 to 4 cars at a time on track, so there won't be any passing. It's done a lot like the way NASA TT works. And then you get to leave. So if you're relatively fast, you are in the earlier groups, and then you get to leave. And once you leave, you drive to the next place. And then it depends on how you want to drive. That's the do you feel lucky part. If you drive excessively on the excessive rates of speed on the highway, you may be detained by the gendarmes or whoever. We don't do that. We actually drive 10 over. And if somebody wants to give me a ticket for 10 over, fine, I'll take that ticket. Otherwise, you usually get a pass on that. And we run completely blind. We don't even use a radar detector. Of course, I'm knocking on wood left and right here. I'm probably setting myself up for getting thrown in the slammer this year, but that's all we do. But because we're usually in the top 10, we typically get out earlier than a lot of people. So different people treat the event different ways. But when you get to the next place, it all depends on when you got there. Generally speaking, you get to the next place anywhere between 10 o'clock and midnight. But the worst we've ever had happen, well, two cases come to mind. One year we were in Florida at Daytona. We went to Gainesville, the real famous drag strip. We did drag night there. We didn't get out of there typically until 6 or 7 o'clock, and then you had to drive to New Orleans. Ooh. So what Ann and I did, she's a night owl and I'm an early riser, and so she drove. We broke it in half. I think we went to Biloxi or Gulfport or somewhere like that, and she drove there, and then I got up at 4 a.m. and drove the rest of the way while she slept in the car to NOLA. That's rare. And the absolute worst case was this 2 years ago. We were at Carolina Motorsports Park during the day. We went to the BMW Performance Center and ran there on their test track and didn't leave there until 6 or 7. Then we had to be in New Jersey. And most people didn't get in. We didn't get in until 3 o'clock in the morning. Some guys just drove to the track and slept in the parking lot. We went to a hotel, got like an hour or two sleep, took a shower, and went to the track. And that was the worst, but that's rare. That's really, really rare. Usually you get in 10 o'clock to midnight. So, but it's part of the deal. It's part of the experience, is that whole sleep deprivation thing. It's just, you'll get one of those maybe during a week. It's kind of, finishing the event. It's not just about doing well. I'd say 25, 30% of the people there are all about doing well. Most people are there about the experience and finishing the event. It's an experiential event. Hayward and I have had this discussion. When he was looking at some of the new stuff they were doing for SCCA. It's all about the experience. It's not just about competition. And that's why there aren't so many rules.
Yeah, and you said the fast people. Is it just raw time or is it fast per class? How's that structured?
Both. So the big trophies, the big, sort of accolades are making the overall top 10. And that just doesn't matter what you're running. Generally, the cars that are in the overall top 10 come from the fastest class, but not always. We were actually when we ran the CRX, that's actually from the slowest class, what they call Econobox. and that's grocery getters and stuff. But because the mods are unlimited, you can do whatever you want to the car, other than you got to run on one set of street tires for the whole week. So you can make it pretty darn fast. But then you're running against 1,000 horsepower GTRs with all-wheel drive electronics that'll save your ass in the rain and all that kind of stuff. So you still, there's quite a bit of driving that's involved. So having a fast car and a fast driver is usually the recipe to be in the overall top 10. Now, that said, there are classes. And the classes are based on mostly the style of car and the price. I think at the moment we have like 10 classes or something like that. Because some guys just want to compete for sort of class wins and or not care about it at all. And so, for example, I think there's like luxury sedan. And BMWs tend to dominate that, although there's been some what were the other ones out there, like a Panamera and things like that fit into that class. There's also the SUV class, which is kind of fun. We actually ran there the one year when Ann hurt her neck. We actually ran in her Cayenne that one year, and so that was kind of fun. There's there's the American Cruiser class. That's hilarious. That's these guys with like ex-police cars. Ford LTD, station
Crown
wagon,
Vics.
or Crown. A lot of Crown Vics. There's one guy who's got a Crown Vic, and he pulls a trailer because you're allowed to pull a trailer. No support vehicles, but you can pull a trailer. He had a trailer that was the back half, trunk half of a Crown Vic, so that he's pulling behind a Crown Vic is absolutely hilarious.
So overall, a good time. Like you said, it's all about the experience. I should at least look at it again thinking, oh, okay, you don't have to sleep every single day.
Nope, not at all. And in fact, what I tell people is if you're into track stuff at all, and or even if you're just an autocrosser, even if all you do is go rent a Mustang or something, or Camaro or whatever, and just go do it. It's a bucket list item. You will have a freaking blast. You can't not have a blast unless you go in with trying to do too much too soon. My favorite story there is Mark Osgood and Dave O'Malley came in one year with his old Osgood's old SMF turbocharged EG Honda. And they were going to dominate. They were going to kick ass. They were going to do well. And I love those guys. But I could just see this train wreck coming. They didn't even just use the car the way it was. They put more power into it. They rebuilt like everything. They completely new front brakes. And their whole week was spent fixing problems. They ended up not finishing the event in that car. Dave eventually went and got his ST Civic just to finish the event. Mark went home to his family and all. But those guys had more problems. But they also had a ball. But talk about drama. That was the perfect example of how not to do it if you want to have a normal, relaxed, good time. Now, if you like drama, there you go. That's the way to go for it.
I love your point. Just go rent a car for the week. That's probably the best advice yet.
There's 3 letters, CDW. You know what that stands for? Collision Damage Waiver. Collision Damage Waiver. It is your ticket to shenanigans in any rental car. Not that I've ever been involved in any of that. That would never have happened.
A good point. That's probably the only time I should say yes and check a box.
There you go.
Oh, Andy, it's been fun. Any other thoughts? Any other things you want to get in?
Not a lot. I mean, the one topic we didn't really touch on was rules making and all of that. I mean, I spent 20 years on the SEB and the various 2 times on the stock advisory, 2 times on the street touring advisory committee. I'm going to throw just one thing out for that, and that is it is the hardest darn job to do. And so often, because of the stigma is attached with the job and the target that gets put on your back, our best and brightest don't ever volunteer for it because they know they're just going to get trampled on. And I went through all of that and had the target on my back, and there's still people who the relationship got soured because of their politics of motorsports, and it's unfortunate that it happens. But it's a necessary part of our sport, and it is in fact all of us as a community, and we poo-poo all over some of our folks, and then the folks we don't necessarily get the best talent or the most experienced talent doing it, and it's kind of unfortunate that we do that to ourselves. And I would highly recommend if you're interested in that sort of thing and are adept at rules writing and stuff like that to throw your hat into the ring and do it Don't just talk about it or complain about it. Be part of the process. I could name a couple of names that were people that used to complain all the frickin' time, and then they got involved. And you know what? Now they get it. They totally get it, and it's made their love of the sport better. And we don't have to listen to them complain anymore. And so it's thanks to them for doing that. I really, really appreciate that.
Oh, and how dare I not ask you the car questions? If you have unlimited budget, what are you trying next?
Oh, geez. People ask me that all throughout. It's like, which was your favorite car and stuff like that. And, honestly, the car that I bond with the most is just the EF Honda chassis. There's something about that chassis that I bond with it on the track in the form of the One Lap CRX and its predecessor. I bond with it on the autocross course in the S2 Civics. And even the early, I ran those cars in D stock back in the day. There's just something about that car that I bond with it I really, really love. But there are other cars. I love C5 Vets, and they're great track cars too. There's been a lot of times when I've thought about just phoning up Danny Pop and say, "Hey, Danny, can you here's some money? Go build me one, would you? That'll work on the track as well as on an autocross course." But I'm not one of these guys. Like I know a lot of your podcast guys say, "Oh, I want to run a mod car. I want to run Kiesel's cars and all like that." And I'm sure those are a blast and all, but I don't really have a desire to do it. I can kind of envision what it'll be like, and I'm sure it'll probably be even better than that vision. But for me, again, it's more about the experience of doing well with the tool at hand. And I go back to that statement I made earlier. If I can have a stack of cones, an empty lot, preferably with a timer, doesn't have to be, and just some cool car, I will have a really darn good time. And if there's somebody else out there, just one other guy, and we're, like Dave and I, when we're testing for the magazine, we try not to compete, but there's no doubt that at the end of the day, we will peek at each other's times. We don't during the time, but we will peek and see who, quote, won and all like that. And he's been killing me a lot lately just because I'm getting older and he's run up there way more than I have, but that's fine. It's all good. So for me, it's just the fun of driving around cones or driving around the track. That's really what it's about. So I just wish at this point my wish would be that my McLaren ran right. So if we get that thing going, then that may be my favorite car, at least for a little while. So we'll see how that goes.
Very cool. No, thanks again for all the insight and tips.
Sure, you're welcome, and thanks for the opportunity. And I can't wait to see who else you have on here so I can listen to those on my next trip across the country.
Thanks for listening. For the show notes and contact information, please visit autocrosstalk.com. There you can also subscribe so that we can keep you up to date on new shows as they come out. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on iTunes for the upcoming shows. You can connect to our Facebook page at facebook.com/autocrosstalk. You can share your thoughts, your insights, your questions, your suggestions there. Also share with your friends. Hopefully you found it entertaining and motivating, and hopefully other people will as well. It's been fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and check back next week for the next show.